Phoenix Nights. Chapter 533. The two-peak stage of the demon overlord did not make a move, but two terrifying breaths had completely locked on Chenrui. Chenrui had no doubt that as long as he made a move, he would inevitably be destroyed by a thunderous attack. "Are you from the Bloodfall? Or the Dark Moon?" The first to speak was the demon overlord of the great demon family on the left. He looked old with white hair and beard. He looked fragile, but his hands looked very white, which did not match his age. Chenrui was most vigilant of this opponent. He was even more vigilant than the demon overlord, who was only a middle-aged royal family. Due to the limited talent, it was difficult for ordinary demons to break through their own bottlenecks. The higher the level, the more the royal family occupied. It was the first time for Chenrui to see a non-royal family powerhouse at the peak stage of the demon overlord. This kind of powerhouse did not have the talent power of the royal family, but they were all people with great perseverance and wisdom. Their combat skills and experience were absolutely terrifying. Sure enough, as soon as the old man spoke, he hit the key point. "Dark Moon Red Blood Legion Deputy Legion Leader, Aguile." Chenrui had completely calmed down. He bowed slightly to the two of them in neither humble nor arrogant manner. "It turns out to be the Dark Moon." The old man nodded. A bloody light flashed in his red eyes. He flicked his middle finger suddenly, and a strong sharp chi attacked Chenrui from the air. The speed of this sharp chi was very terrifying. When it reached in front of Chenrui, there was a sharp sound of breaking through the air. This old man at the peak stage of the demon overlord actually took advantage of Chenrui's salute to kill him without any grace. Chenrui's attention had always been highly concentrated. When the old man's power condensed on his finger, his spirit power had already captured the possible attack trajectory. He teleported to avoid this sneak attack. "Sir's strength is far better than mine. What are you worried about?" the royal family demon overlord said. "It's enough to know that you are from the Dark Moon. Is it necessary for us to talk nonsense with the dying ant?" Just as Chenrui completed his teleportation, the old man's swift and fierce finger flicks once again attacked at high speed. Chenrui was already prepared. As he spoke, his hands emitted a faint light, drawing out gentle ripples to meet the attack. The high speed and sharpness seemed to have sunk into a quagmire, and immediately slowed down. The old man and the royal demon overlord were moved because the enemy with only demon emperor level breath not only withstood the power of the peak stage of the demon overlord's finger snap, but he also reflected the sharp force to the front of the royal demon overlord in a mysterious way. If it was before leaving the Dark Moon, with Chenrui's reaction speed, even with the royal star transformation and star diversion, it would be difficult to keep up with this level of high-speed attack. However, during this time, he not only obtained the demigod-level soul power, which made his spirit power qualitatively change to the S level, but he also had the valuable experience of fighting with the Abyss Lord. Although it was only 2 swords, after that kind of life and death experience, when facing the enemy of the peak stage of the demon overlord, whether it was his body or mind, Chenrui showed calmness and steadiness that he did not have before. The current star diversion was mixed with the soft water power that he learned from Catherine. It was more powerful, and the control was more precise. Seeing that the sharp force was about to hit the royal family demon overlord's throat, a palm with a faint black light blocked in front. When the sharp force hit the palm, it actually made a metal-like sound. The royal family demon overlord felt the pain in his palm, and he frowned slightly. He turned his palm, and a giant palm with a virtual seal appeared in the air, pressing toward Chenrui like a mountain. However, just like the sharp force of the finger flick, the giant palm flew toward the old man strangely as soon as it touched the enemy. The old man felt the strong pressure from the giant palm. He flicked his fingers continuously, and countless sharp forces split the giant palm into pieces and dissipated. In a split second, the three had exchanged countless attacks and defenses. The dazzling flames flashed quickly in the secret vault, mixed with endless sharp sounds and vibrations. Fortunately, the room where the artifact was placed was extremely sturdy. Even the power of the peak stage of the demon overlord could only cause a small crack. The evenly matched situation moved the royal family demon overlord and the old man, but Chunrui knew that the effectiveness of star diversion was only 10 seconds. It was about to expire, and the paper tiger would show its true form, so he spoke immediately. "Wait a minute! I'm not afraid of fighting or life and death. I just hope to say a few words before that because it's related to the fate of this artifact, and even the fate of the entire empire." If it was a few seconds ago, the two-peak stage of the demon overlord would not even bother to talk nonsense with such a weak person, just like the old man suddenly attacked just now. However, the strength that Chunrui showed now was far beyond their expectations. With this strength, this calmness, and the ability to detect their existence previously, how could he be a mere demon emperor? The two determined that the enemy in front of them was definitely a powerhouse who pretended to be weak. After looking at each other, they finally stopped. 1 minute. The old man spoke. At this time, the time for star diversion was just up. Chunrui secretly thought it was a close call. He shook his head. 1 minute is too little. I can't finish talking. 5 minutes. The two demon overlords had already faintly regarded him as a formidable enemy. When they heard this bargaining that was beneath their status, they couldn't help but show a weird expression, but they had no objection in the end. Dark Moon Red Blood Legion Deputy Legion Leader, Aguile. With the same self-introduction, the two demon overlords did not act rashly this time. They said their names as a certain respect for this opponent. Royal Elder Oliver. Lucifer. Elder Family Cowan. Toro. Chunrui only knew that this white-haired old man turned out to be one of the strongest elders of the Elder family, Old Cowan of the Toro family. Another intermediate stage of the demon overlord of the Toro family, Venom, once assassinated the third general of the Dark Shadow Empire, Crawford, who visited the Dark Moon at the auction. Later, he was captured alive by Rala's magic and surrendered to the Dark Moon. It could be said that the Toro family was greatly humiliated. Therefore, the old man did not hesitate to kill Chunrui after hearing that he came from the Dark Moon. Obsidian took away many powerful elders this time. Oliver and Cowan were the main forces of the Elder family to stay in the capital. "Both of you, I came to the secret vault this time for the Sword of Fallen Angel." This was almost nonsense, but the next words surprised Oliver and Cowan. "I was entrusted by the owner of the Sword of Fallen Angel to take away the artifact that should belong to her." Oliver and Cowan's surprise was only fleeting, then it was replaced by disdain. "What is the Sword of Fallen Angel?" "The supreme artifact of the Lucifer royal family, one of the 7 artifacts of the demon realm. Since the death of the Lord of Midnight Sun 300 years ago, no royal family, including Regent Obsidian, has been recognized by the artifact." Now, Aguile actually boasted shamelessly that he was entrusted by the owner of the Sword of Fallen Angel. Even a child wouldn't believe such a clumsy lie. This is indeed an incredible thing. Even I had this question when I first received the commission, but the answer will be revealed soon. Chunrui slowly took out something from the space ring. As soon as this thing appeared, the Sword of Fallen Angel, which had been floating in the air without any response, actually began to emit a faint light. Oliver and Cowan were shocked at the same time. They had guarded the secret vault for many years, so they naturally knew how many attempts Regent Obsidian had made to get the recognition of the Sword of Fallen Angel, but the Sword of Fallen Angel had always been sleeping without any movement. It even rejected anyone who approached. However, a miracle suddenly appeared today, and it happened right in front of their own eyes. The two of them focused on the thing in Chunrui's hand. It was a small bottle with some red liquid in it which seemed to be blood. When Chunrui approached the Sword of Fallen Angel with the small bottle, the Sword of Fallen Angel was not only flashing, but it also made a buzzing sound. The sword body began to tremble as if it was very excited. The Sword of Fallen Angel could not be kept in the storage warehouse. Although Chunrui wanted to take the sword and run away, he also understood that there was a limit to everything. If he got closer, it was difficult to guarantee that the two guardians would attack recklessly, so he stopped and plugged the bottle. The roar of the Sword of Fallen Angel stopped as expected, and the previous silence was restored. Oliver and Cowan stared at the small bottle containing the blood, and their breathing became heavy. After a while, Old Cowan finally took the lead to speak. "This bottle," Chinray said unhurriedly. "This is obviously a magic bottle that can keep the blood fresh." Who asked about the bottle? Even the royal elder Oliver, who had always been calm, couldn't help but shout. "Whose blood does this bottle belong to?" Chinray's face suddenly changed into solemnity, and he said the answer. "The granddaughter of the Lord of Midnight Sun, the Princess Royal of the Empire, the Lord of the Dark Moon Estate, and also my fiancé Jia. Lucifer." Although they had already vaguely guessed this answer, the two-peak stage of the demon overlord still showed shock after being confirmed personally. For 300 years, Regent Obsidian had tried his best to awaken the Sword of Fallen Angel, but he had never succeeded. Now a small bottle of Princess Royal Jia's blood could cause such a strong reaction from the Sword of Fallen Angel. The choice of the artifact was obvious. No one could deny this fact. It was just that Oliver and Cowan never thought that this blood was not Princess Royal Jia's at all, but it was, freshly, released by Chinray himself. He released some blood and took it out through the storage warehouses, camouflage. In other words, the blood recognition was simply a lie. In fact, the Sword of Fallen Angel had always been sealed by powerful ancient runes. Even if Jia really came here, she couldn't be recognized. When Chinray came to the secret vault with Obsidian as Charles, he spent a lot of time and effort to help Obsidian crack the Sword of Fallen Angel. At that time, Chinray had the idea of stealing the Sword of Fallen Angel, but unfortunately, he couldn't have it both ways. He never had the chance, so he finally chose to cheat away the huge sum of money. After drawing a hopeful pie for the poor Royal Highness Regent, Charles sacrificed heroically in the battle with Brock because he was unwilling to accept the recruitment of the Bloodfall organization. His coveting of the artifact was forced to come to an end at that time until he came here again today. The real reason for the mutation of the Sword of Fallen Angel was actually that Chinray used the foreshadowing to trigger a certain reaction by triggering the seal of the ancient runes. For the Sword of Fallen Angel, which had been silent for 300 years, this strong reaction was enough to prove that the artifact recognized the owner of the blood, Princess Royal Jia. Chapter 534. Seeing the horror of the two-peak stage of the Demon Overlord Guardians, Chinray had an idea and added, "Now you should understand why Regent Obsidian forced the Lord of Midnight Sun's descendants to the Dark Moon." This sentence was tantamount to breaking the news again. Oliver and Cowan looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes at the same time. Regent Obsidian banished the son of the Lord of Midnight Sun, Grim, to the Dark Moon. And Obsidian deliberately banished the Crown Prince knowing that the Lord of Midnight Sun's descendants could be recognized by the Sword of Fallen Angel. Were two completely different concepts. The most important point was that Obsidian himself could not be recognized by the Sword of Fallen Angel. The struggle and alternation of power within the royal family had never been a rare thing for an empire. Many forces would acquiesce to this kind of rise and fall, but the significance of the successor recognized by the artifact was completely different. The artifact was the symbol of the empire, and it was also the national treasure to protect the empire. The will of the artifact represented the rise and fall of the entire empire. The king of the empire must be recognized by the artifact. This was not only the tradition of the demon realm, but also a necessary condition for the confrontation between the kings of the empire. Obsidian was unable to match the two great emperors, Catherine and Raisin. In addition to strength, the artifact was also a very key factor. Because of this, Obsidian had always been in the name of the regent, and he couldn't rightfully ascend the throne. Therefore, General George and others had enough reasons to publicly question and oppose Obsidian. Listening to Aguile, now, it turned out that Obsidian couldn't get the artifact's recognition himself. In order to seize power, he ignored the will of the artifact, exiled and severely suppressed the Crown Prince Grimm's descendants. This was no longer an ordinary issue of power succession, but it was related to the future of the entire empire. It was equivalent to Obsidian deceiving the entire empire. The Elder of the Empire means supreme glory, but at the same time, There is also a more important responsibility than glory, which is to protect the artifact with everything you have. Protect the Empire. I don't know how many elder families and elders still remember the original intention of this vow with their lives. Chenrui was no longer a rookie who knew nothing about the three empires. Seeing the hesitation in the hearts of the two elders, he seized the opportunity to spit out a sentence that stood on the moral high ground. Oliver and Cowan were silent at the same time. 5 minutes had already passed, but the two of them seemed to have forgotten this limit and had no intention of making a move. In fact, after seeing the reaction of the god artifact, their battle intent and killing intent as guardians had been completely shattered. The only thing they had to think about now was how to digest and deal with this matter. Not only was it related to the god artifact, but it was also related to the fate of the entire family, the royal family, and the empire. They could have questioned more than one person who was recognized by the artifact, but the fact was that since the fall of the Lord of Midnight's Sun 300 years ago, Jiao was the first and only person who caused the change in the Sword of Fallen Angel. She undoubtedly proved the true ownership of the artifact. In fact, it was equivalent to proving who was the chosen one of the Fallen Angel Empire. Let's just treat it as an ordinary sword. Perhaps the recognition of a sword doesn't mean anything. I understand that the elder families have their own interests, but the premise of this interest is the interests of the entire Fallen Angel Empire. Both of you are experienced senior powerhouses. You should be very clear that the current Fallen Angel Empire's economy is declining and its military is weak. Regent Obsidian only cares about his own selfish desires. He madly accumulates wealth internally, suppresses dissidents, and does not hesitate to violate the will of the artifact. Servile to outsiders, using a large number of offerings in exchange for the so-called peace, and putting life and death in the hands of others. Is this still the strongest fallen angel empire of the demon realm 300 years ago? If this continues, it is only a matter of time before it is destroyed. If the entire empire is destroyed, can the royal family and the elder family still retain the so-called honor and interests? Oliver and Cowan looked at each other. This question could be answered with their eyes closed, but they couldn't answer it at this time. Those empires that had perished were the best examples. The royal families and families that had been glorious for a time had ended up being exterminated, disappeared, or reduced to vassals under someone else's roof. What benefits and dignity did they have left? After a long time, Cowan squeezed out a sentence. If for the sake of the overall situation, why didn't Princess Jia agree to the regent's proposal? What a joke! When the Shadow Empire was in turmoil, why didn't Empress Catherine consider the overall situation and surrender to those rebellious royal families? In that case, would there still be the Shadow Empire today? Chenrui did not hide his contempt and sneered. The king recognized by the artifact is the real king. He is definitely not a decoration or a vassal. How can a real king yield to a shameful rebel? Why did Obsidian attack the Dark Moon with that kind of shameless reason? Because Princess Jia is the real recognized by the artifact. She is the real hope for the prosperity of the entire Fallen Angel Empire. Without waiting for the two to refute, Chenrui immediately cited the facts. She led the people of the Dark Moon. In less than 10 years she managed the Dark Moon, which has been declining for 400 years, into the most powerful and prosperous estate in the entire demon realm. This is still under the sanctions of Obsidian's various means. Can Obsidian do it? He has ruled the empire for 300 years. What has he done? Using the so-called fundraising to defraud the lords of money? Paying tribute to the two empires in exchange for a lingering peace? Going against the will of the artifact to deceive the entire empire? Using a shameful excuse to kill the real master of the artifact and the empire? The two elders of the peak stage of the demon overlord were extremely powerful, but in the face of the barrage of fierce words, they simply couldn't respond. Oliver barely resisted the sentence. Sir's eloquence is far sharper than your strength. Then he didn't say anything anymore. Chenrui accepted this praise unreservedly. As a technical geek who dominated BBS and forums and immersed in ACG for more than 10 years, if he couldn't do physical work, Wouldn't his verbal attacks be heaven-defying? After a long time, Cowan calmed down and said, I can't deny the facts you said, but an empire is not as simple as an estate. I understand, and I also understand that even if both of you have agreed in your hearts, you can't express anything for the sake of the empire or your own family's interests. After all, this is a world that speaks with fists. I don't need both of you to express anything. I can even not take away the sword of fallen angel today. Oliver frowned. Then what exactly do you want? I just sincerely hope that the royal family and elder families preserve their vitality, and don't sacrifice for Obsidian's personal interests in vain. Not only for the interests of the Empire, but also for myself. This sentence was very sincere. Oliver and Cowan exchanged a look and said, Answer a question truthfully first. If the two of us join forces to attack now, will you be able to escape? Shinrui pondered for a moment, and nodded firmly. This was not bragging. Royal Star Transformation, plus Demonic Fly's Transformation, plus Stargate, plus Demon Shield. If he was lucky, he could even take away the Sword of Fallen Angel. However, the opponent had 2 peak stage of the Demon Overlord, so the hope of the latter was minimal. In that case, the exposure of the God-Eating Mask and Demon Shield would bring more trouble. Oliver saw that Shinrui was not bragging, so he nodded slightly. Since this is the case, you can go. However, don't think about the Sword of Fallen Angel again. In any case, we are the guardians of the secret vault. We will never hold back next time. Thank you, I am indebted to both of you. I know that both of you are giving face to the owner of the artifact, Princess Royal. However, I will not give up the Sword of Fallen Angel. Shinrui rolled his eyes. How about we make a bet? Within 10 days, I will use all means to get this sword. If I fail, I will return to the Dark Moon and bring Princess Jia here. How about that? Oliver and Cowan's eyes lit up when they heard the last sentence. Old Cowan asked warily, What if you win? Sir Cowan is really cautious. You actually think so highly of me? Shinrui smiled slightly. Well, if I win by luck, I only need Sir to help me realize the previous hope. Hope? I don't expect the Guardians to fulfill the Oath of Life, nor do I force you to deal with Obsidian. I just hope that in this battle, both of you can try your best to preserve the power of the royal family and the elder families. That's all. The two originally thought that the other party would use the Sword of Fallen Angel as a bet, but they didn't expect it to be this request that was not considered a request. They couldn't help but show a complicated look in their eyes. Shinrui unscrupulously made a vow in the name of the artifact. He secretly fiddled with the storage warehouse of the super system for a while. With a wave of his hand, a recording stone floated in the air. I'll leave first. It's not convenient to say something. Please listen to this later. With that said, Shinrui walked to the door and quickly left the scope of the inner treasury. Oliver saw that there was nothing wrong with the recording stone. With a wave of his hand, the recording stone appeared in his hand. It turns out to be a fixed message. An hour? Well, let's see what tricks this guy is playing then. Oliver, Princess Royal Highness and the Sword of Fallen Angel, I'm a royal family member, and a member of the royal family. If it's just a simple problem of a person and a sword, I will not hesitate to fulfill the guardian oath I once made. However, what we have to protect is not only an artifact, but more importantly, the entire empire. Old Cowan sighed. Yes, but as the guy said just now, can a person like Obsidian represent the entire empire? Power. Oliver was silent for a while, and he gave the answer. This war against the Dark Moon may be a battle that determines the fate of the entire empire. If Princess Royal really represents the will of the artifact, then, listening to you, I suddenly feel that it is not a shame for the family's Venom to join the Dark Moon. There is an old saying in the demon realm that all eggs should not be put in one basket. Old friend, aren't you afraid that I will spread this sentence? Oliver smiled slightly. In fact, I also have a hunch now that this seemingly unsuspenseful crusade will bring a lot of suspense. Maybe there will be incredible things that will happen just like the miracle that appeared in front of us just now. 8 points. Shinrui, who returned to the hotel, gave a score to his performance today. Although the sword of fallen angel did not change hands, if he was lucky, it was not wishful thinking to come back with interest. The super system that played a key role was indeed a heaven-defying treasure. The storage warehouse function alone was ridiculously convenient. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time. Otherwise, I will calm down and deeply understand the mystery of the super system. I don't want the situation where my spirit power is cut off to cause failure again. It's about to start, the capital's banquet. Chenrui, who closed his eyes to rest, opened his eyes. He took out a magic timer and looked at it. He looked up at the stars in the night sky outside the window. A beautiful figure with blonde hair and a white dress appeared in his mind. Can you see it? My Princess Royal Highness. Town Leith of the Dark Moon Estate, outside the central tent of the barracks. The blonde woman looked up at the bright starry sky, and a touch of longing appeared in her usually indifferent purple eyes. Chapter 535. Royal Highness Jia. A woman wearing a veil appeared beside Jia. Although she was wrapped in a cloak, her hot figure was still inadvertently revealed. You're here. Jia retracted her gaze from the starry sky. Obsidian sent someone to challenge me to a decisive battle in the wilderness 3 days later. What do you think? He is waiting. The veiled woman's tone was very firm. The enemy's comprehensive strength is still above us, but because we showed a combat power beyond the enemy's expectations before, it has shaken Obsidian's mentality. Therefore, he has to wait for the internal purge, wait for the surprise attack in the west, or something else. In short, he is waiting for the best time to launch a general attack. Jia nodded. We are also waiting. Yes, we are not only waiting for the west but also the north. I just got the news from the White Feather Estate. The White Feather Estate is completely under our control. According to the itinerary, the plan has already progressed to the capital. Very good, then we have a little more hope. Jia's spirit was refreshed. Her purple eyes flashed with surprise, and she regained her calmness. No matter what, the decisive battle 3 days later is the real key to determine the outcome. The enemy is powerful, and there is no room for mistakes. Really? The veiled woman showed a strange look. Princess Royal Highness is really worrisome. You are obviously excited, but you show an indifferent look. You obviously want to hear the news of that person, but you pretend as if nothing happened. She didn't expect the woman to say such bold words without warning. Her face suddenly became cold, and she revealed a murderous vibe without concealing it. The veiled woman caressed a strand of brown-yellow hair in front of her forehead nonchalantly. Initially, a small leader like me doesn't dare to interfere with the Honorable Princess Royal Highness' private affairs. However, Princess Royal Highness clearly has no confidence in this battle, and her heart is obviously in a mess. But she pretends to be a strategist and confident female military god. Such a duplicitous commander will only harm those foolishly loyal followers. If the previous murderous aura was just a breeze, now it had skyrocketed into a terrible hurricane, firmly locking on the veiled woman. The cold voice sounded. What do you want to say? The veiled woman's aura suddenly changed. She didn't show any sign of weakness and faced the murderous aura head-on. This kind of superficial calmness is fine for the generals and soldiers to see, but most importantly, what do you see? Nervous? Indecision? Fear? Worry? The only thing he didn't have was the confidence to win. Our strength was originally at a disadvantage. If such a commander were to command the battle 3 days later, the result would be certain defeat. Did I say anything wrong? Princess Royal? Jia gradually restrained her murderous aura. She didn't look at the veiled woman but looked away. I'm not as good as the people and soldiers think. It has only been 7 years since I took over the position of lord from my dying father. I have neither powerful strength nor excellent commanding talent and combat experience. Without him, the Dark Moon is still in a precarious situation now. Because today's prosperity and strength are hard-won, I'm nervous, worried, and afraid that I will fail. But this is a battle that must be faced. In any case, I will not escape or give up. Is it enough just not to give up? I remember that Princess Royal once led the army to fight against the Red Spirit Estate and the Blue Lava Estate's coalition army. It was also on this battlefield. The veiled woman smiled lightly. Were you afraid at that time? At that time. Jia looked at the veiled woman's clear eyes and seemed to understand something. At that time, she arranged an escape route for Alice and used a trick to drive the man away. She fought with the determination to die. She didn't seem to have the concept of fear. Later, he appeared and miraculously reversed the battle situation. She would never forget the figure of the man who rushed to the Red Spirit Estate army alone. For Princess Royal. Jia's eyes suddenly became a little hazy. My stupid woman. Because I know that I'm going to do it. We will win the final victory, just like we will be together forever as long as we have this persistence. Do you have it? The past and the present began to overlap, and the flame hidden in her heart began to gradually burn and expand into a prairie fire, until the faint mist surging from her purple eyes evaporated completely. The corner of her cold and elegant lips slightly curled up, and she softly said to the imaginary shadow, Yes. After saying this word, Jia's eyes became clearer. She met the veiled woman's gaze without avoiding it. However, the veiled woman did not look at her anymore, but she took out something. A musical instrument, Xiuqin. It seems that Princess Royal seems to be a little more energetic. Then, as your subordinate, I will work harder and play a little tune to refresh our Princess Royal. There was a hint of provocation in the veiled woman's green and moving eyes. The tune that he taught. Hearing the last sentence, Jia's firm eyes suddenly emitted a fierce aura. It was not murderous, but a unique hostility between women. Damn fickle man! Achoo! A guy far away in the capital was talking about the plan to a few people around him with a solemn face. Suddenly, he sneezed inexplicably, and the solemn atmosphere was immediately destroyed. Who misses me? Chen Rui rubbed his nose embarrassedly. He gave a few instructions and looked at the timer. Start now! The surrounding black shadows responded in unison and quickly dispersed in all directions. At the same time, the capital's patrol guards unexpectedly found a large number of troops in the northern suburbs. Judging from the logo of the flag and armor, it was actually the army of the White Feather Estate. The White Feather Estate Lord Sikali was also in the army. He was the commander of the army. According to Sikali, he had urgent military affairs and needed to enter the capital. This news surprised the patrol guards. It was related to military affairs, so they did not dare to neglect. They immediately took Sikali and a group of about 500 personal guards to the north gate. Seeing a group of black cavalry approaching the city wall from a distance, the guards at the north gate were facing a formidable enemy. The guard commander, Sameo, hurriedly ordered the soldiers to activate the emergency magic defense circle, turn on the night war lighting equipment, and get ready to face the enemy. The captain of the patrol guards hurriedly stepped forward and explained the situation to Sameo across the defensive position. The army of the White Feather Estate? Sameo was taken aback. His gaze fell on the face of Sikali, who was surrounded by cavalry under the light, and his expression was slightly relieved. General Sameo, do you still recognize me? We have had a drink together in the Leisure Moon Inn. Sikali rode his mount forward. It really is the White Feather Estate Lord Sikali. Sameo bowed slightly, but he did not immediately open the defense circle. I really want to talk about friendship with the general again, but now the military affairs are urgent and can't be delayed. General Sameo, please open the city gate and let my army pass. Sameo frowned and said, Sir Sikali, what military affairs require the White Feather Estate's army to mobilize? Why didn't I receive an order from the Military Affairs Department? I'm sorry, this is my duty. I must ask clearly. Sikali jumped off the horse, walked up alone, and said, It's a secret, so it's not convenient to say it. Open the defense magic circle first. Sameo thought for a while and ordered the soldiers to open the defense magic. Sikali ordered the guards to stand by. He came all the way to Sameo, put his arm around his shoulder familiarly, and went to a corner. He channeled his power to isolate the sound from the outside. General Sameo, we are also considered old friends. I wonder if you know the news of the Regent's coalition army's crusade against the Dark Moon? Sameo hesitated a little and nodded. I heard a little. First, General Nesta and the Magic Shadow Legion were forced to surrender to the enemy. General Seymour and the Nether Hydra Legion died in battle. Then, the coalition army attacked the Moonlight Fortress and suffered heavy losses. Then, Town Daiko was ambushed. The 3 elite legions suffered heavy losses, and the Flying Cloud Legion was completely annihilated. This time, the coalition army can be said to have bitten a tough bone. Sameo was very clear about the matters of Nesta and Seymour. He also knew a little about the Battle of the Moonlight Fortress. As for the Battle of Town Daiko, it was the first time he heard about it. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. Now this battle situation has made Royal Highness Regent lose face. I received a secret order to lead the army south through the Red Spirit Estate this time, then detour to Town Leia of the Shadow Empire to raid the west of the Dark Moon. Sikali said mysteriously. This secret plan is very critical to the entire Dark Moon Crusade. Royal Highness Regent has always been wary of the elder families. He doesn't want these forces of the elder families to know about this plan. Sameo knew that the Minister of Military Affairs was a member of the elder families, and the relationship between the elder families and the regent was in a very tense state. He looked enlightened. I know that General is a direct descendant of General Doran and not a member of the elder families, so I revealed so much. General must keep it a secret. Otherwise, if there is a mistake in this secret plan, General will also be implicated. Do you understand? Sameo showed a bitter smile of being dragged into a pirate ship and nodded. Well, I will report to General Doran at the barracks. After getting his warrant, I will lead my army into the city. This is the rule. Sir, please don't make it difficult for me. Sikali smiled slightly, patted him on the shoulder, and dispersed the soundproof power. It doesn't matter. Thank you for making this trip personally, General. I will wait for you here. Shortly after Sameo left the city gate, he heard a loud noise suddenly coming from the city. He stopped a patrolling soldier and found out that the pub area suddenly caught fire, and several houses were burned. After walking for a while, news of fires and explosions came one after another. Not only the outer city, but also the inner city. Even General Doran's mansion was not spared. If it was just a pub, it would be fine. Now that so many places are on fire at the same time, someone must have deliberately set the fire. For some reason, Simon felt a sense of trepidation. At this time, he felt a tremor coming from the ground as if thousands of troops and horses were galloping. It was particularly clear at night. Sameo turned his head abruptly, and the source of the sound was from the north gate where he was stationed. His face suddenly became extremely pale. At the north gate, groups of cavalry were quickly crossing the corpses of the defenders and rushing into the city. Behind them was a large army with unknown numbers of people. Chapter 536. Under the Moonlight. Dark Moon Estate, Town Leith. The golden-haired woman in the white dress quietly listened to the melodious tune played by the veiled woman. The night wind blew, blowing the veiled woman's cloak, revealing her graceful figure. The cloak and the golden-haired woman complemented each other, like a beautiful painting. The capital under the moonlight was also playing this movement. The theme was blood and fire. The White Feather Estate army that rushed into the capital was quickly divided into 3 parts. One part controlled the garrison, the other part controlled the city gate and important passages, and the other part rushed to the inner city as fast as possible. The inner city was in a state of chaos. There were not many places on fire, and it was not an important place, but the explosion was too terrifying. It spread from the core of the capital, the palace. The power was so terrifying that even the palace's protective magic circle could not resist it. Immediately afterward, the inner city's government hall and the Red Devil Legion barracks were also attacked by explosions. The second General Doran Russ, who guarded the capital, was in a terrible situation. Not only did his mansion catch fire, but there was also an explosion in the palace, followed by explosions everywhere. Looking at the route, it seemed that a dangerous terrorist was throwing bombs along the way. Before the chaos of the explosion and fire subsided, there was another emergency. The inner city was surrounded by a large number of unknown troops, and the city gate was in danger. Where did this large number of troops come from? Doran was surprised and immediately led the Red Devil Legion to meet the enemy. When he was about to reach the city gate, he received the bad news that the deputy commander, Denzel, who was in charge of the city gate defense, killed Commander Virgil and let the enemy into the city. At this time, a large number of enemies had poured into the inner city. Doran couldn't help but be furious when he saw Denzel at the front. Denzel was the former subordinate of the first general, George Wales. When George openly opposed Regent Obsidian, Denzel did not hesitate to side with him, the second general. Over the years, although he did not enter the direct line of the Red Devil's Legion, he was regarded as being put in an important position. I didn't expect him to betray again. Dolan urged his horse forward, and the great sword in his hand, Soul Shatterer, drew a red arc in the air. A shocking crack appeared on the ground, and raging flames rose from the crack as it rapidly extended towards Denzel. Denzel's strength was only at the later stage of the great Demon King. How could he resist the angry sword of a demon emperor? Seeing that he was about to be killed on the spot, a sword suddenly appeared in front of him. The edge of the sword was a demonic lion. Its mouth bit out the engraved patterns on the body of the sword, emitting a faint blue light. This sword had stabbed into the ground after Dwelluin, and before the flames from the crack could even touch it, it had already rolled back. Dwelluin was startled and hurriedly reined in his horse. He pointed the giant sword in his hand, and a wave of sword chi blocked the pillar of fire that shot out from the crack. However, both he and his horse were pushed back by the intense fluctuations. Lion Fong's sword! Dwelluin looked at the familiar figure in front of the sword, his heart pounding. It was because of this person that Regent Obsidian had not dared to kill the Dark Moon over the years. It was because of this person that the Warlock fortress adjacent to the Bloody Empire had always been impregnable. It was because of this person that no matter how brilliant the second general was, he could only be the second of the three generals. In an instant, Dwelluin finally understood why Denzel would betray. Or rather, Denzel was a chess piece buried by this person beside him from the beginning. In the palace's secret vault, Old Cowan and Oliver both had solemn expressions. At first, they thought that the capital's night banquet, mentioned in the delayed recording stone, was just a trick to trick them to leave and steal the sword of Fallen Angel. However, after the loud noise in the distant palace, they gradually realized that something was wrong. Then one after another shocking news came. There were explosions and fires everywhere. At least tens of thousands of troops attacked the capital. Oliver and Old Cowan couldn't believe it. Where did these tens of thousands of troops come from? The Bloody Empire tore up the Alliance and attacked the Fallen Angel Empire? Both the Warlock Fortress and the White Feather Estate have fallen? Why is there no relevant information coming? By the way, the recording stone of the night banquet. Could it be the Dark Moon's army? This is ridiculous. How many troops does the Dark Moon have? Moreover, they are now fighting with the coalition army led by the Regent personally. How can they transfer so many troops to the capital without anyone knowing? According to the latest news, the enemy had breached the gate of the inner city, and they were currently fighting fiercely with the Red Devil Legion of General Dwelluin. Now both Old Cowan and Oliver couldn't sit still. No eggs can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Once the Red Devil Legion is defeated, both the palace and the elder families will suffer a fatal blow. The two made a prompt decision and used the emergency authority to completely close the entire secret vault. This kind of closure must be performed by two guardians at the same time. Even if it was opened again, it would take half a month to enter. The closure was not only to prevent someone who was suspected of taking advantage of the situation, but also to guard against the invading army so that the two of them could act separately. Oliver guarded the palace, organized the Imperial Guards to extinguish the fire, protect the palace, and strengthen the palace's defense. Old Cowan went to the inner city to gather the power of the elder families to assist the Red Devil Legion to destroy the enemy. After Old Cowan left the palace, he rushed all the way. Along the way, he saw the fire soaring into the sky and the continuous sound of explosions. He couldn't help but frown, and he sped up again. In his line of sight, a figure suddenly appeared and blocked in front of him. This person was wearing a cloak that covered his head and body. It looked particularly strange under the purple moonlight. Old Cowan felt that the figure was just at the great demon king level, so his charging speed did not weaken. He secretly bent his middle finger, and 3 strong sharp chi broke through the air, whistling toward the cloaked man in a triangular formation. Old Cowan thought that this blow would definitely kill the opponent, so he didn't bother with this kind of small fry. His figure swept past the cloaked man like the wind. Just as his body passed the cloaked man, he suddenly had a strong warning sign. He felt a sharp force coming from behind at high speed. He turned around in a hurry, and the sharp force left a bloody wound under his ribs. The sound of a sonic boom sounded immediately. It instantly reached the air in front of him from behind. The flying speed was so fast that even Old Cowan, who was at the peak stage of the demon overlord, felt inferior. Old Cowan reacted extremely quickly. Without waiting for the enemy to stabilize his figure, he flicked his 2 fingers continuously, and countless sharp chi surrounded the cloaked man. The cloaked man's hands glowed with a faint light, drawing a water-like trajectory in the air. The sharp chi in the sky was obviously extremely fast, but when it encountered this slow power, it actually slowed down strangely. Then, it suddenly accelerated and blasted in all directions. Dust splashed from the nearby houses and the ground, and the sound of destruction continued. Many small potholes appeared one after another, and there were large cobweb-like cracks around the potholes. This familiar mysterious technique made Old Cowan startled. He shouted in surprise and anger. "It turns out to be you! What the hell do you want to do? Where did those troops come from? Princess Royal and Obsidian's battlefield is not just the Dark Moon," Shinrei replied faintly. "With the capital as a heavyweight, the balance of the war will tilt to the true master of the Empire." Old Cowan's eyes flashed. "The true master of the Empire will not destroy the entire capital. The destruction of the old means a new beginning. To break the original decaying pattern, it is inevitable to destroy some things. Do you still remember the hope I mentioned in the secret vault? The elder families should stay out of it, and preserve the vitality for the true emperor and the entire empire. Don't sacrifice in vain in this kind of internal strife. Oliver and I originally had a good impression of you, but now I don't want to listen to this kind of rhetoric anymore. Today, only one of us can go back alive. Let me see your true power." A terrifying murderous aura emanated from Old Cowan. The storm-like power in the expanding breath was on the verge of breaking out. Compared with the current situation, the previous situation in the palace's secret vault could only be regarded as a breeze and drizzle. Then one last question. Do you still remember the bet between us? Of course. Old Cowan sneered. But you didn't. Before he finished speaking, the sneer froze on Old Cowan's face. He saw the cloaked man take out a long package from behind, then pour a bottle of blood on his hand. He pulled out a sword from the package and raised it high. Under the moonlight, it made a slight humming sound, which actually drowned out the sounds of fighting and explosions in the distance. Old Cowan's face was full of disbelief. For him, who had guarded this sword for hundreds of years, he could feel at the first moment that this was definitely the real sword of fallen angel. This is incredible. Just before I came out of the palace, I also activated the emergency mechanism and joined forces with Oliver to close the secret vault. If I want to forcibly destroy the completely closed secret vault, even if there are 10 peak stage of the demon overlord, I can't succeed. How did this? While get the sword of fallen angel? Shinrei saw Old Cowan's horror and sighed. Don't you understand yet? This is the artifact's own will. Old Cowan was shocked. The artifact can choose its own recognized master. This is indeed true, but the artifact automatically passes through the secret vault. It's incredible, but this is the only explanation that makes sense at present. Otherwise, did this Igual spend more than 10 minutes in the palace guarded by Oliver to break into the sealed secret vault and steal the artifact? This doesn't make sense. As a guardian, do you really want to violate the will of the artifact and the will of the Empire? Shenrui shook his head. Or do you want to bet the future of the entire elder family and the Empire on the usurper who is about to be annihilated by the artifact's will? Sir should have heard that the Capital Coalition army has suffered repeated setbacks in the Dark Moon, right? Then, sir, please continue to wait and see how the Dark Moon creates miracles. The new king of the Empire will be crowned with the blood of the traitors. Old Cowan's murderous aura had gradually subsided, and Shenrui took the opportunity to add, I don't ask the elder families to deal with the Red Devil Legion. You just need to stay out of it. As long as the elder families remain silent tonight, I can guarantee that I will never hurt the elder families. Old Cowan's expression changed. He was obviously hesitating. The bet was actually just an excuse, but the current situation really made it difficult for him to choose. Don't worry, Sir Cowan. I can swear in front of the Supreme Artifact that if the elder families can adhere to the position of protecting the artifact and the Empire, even after the new order is established in the future, their status and interests will be preserved. I didn't fabricate this out of thin air, but it is a promise from Princess Jia, or soon it will be called Her Majesty Jia. Old Cowan took a deep breath and finally made up his mind. Well, as a guardian, I can't violate the will of the artifact. I will immediately go back and urgently summon all the elder families to stay put. I can even help you persuade my old friend who guards the palace. However, Princess Jia, please remember your promise to the artifact. Shenrui's eyes lit up, and he nodded solemnly. Old Cowan promised not only to stay put, but also to persuade Oliver. It was definitely an unexpected gain. As for the will of the artifact, Shenrui was really a little embarrassed. In fact, it was very simple. The 2 star points of the Star Gate, the secret vault of the Sword of Fallen Angel, and a hidden place in the inner city. After the 2 guardians were lured out, he would open a door to take the Sword of Fallen Angel, then he would open another door to return to the hidden place in the inner city. As for the star points of the White Feather Estate and the Dark Moon, they had been cancelled. Under Sakali's order, the forces of Town Ista in the north of the estate had been quickly dispatched to Town Kidano in the south. At the same time, an elite force of the Warlock Fortress led by General George personally came to the south. The conflict caused by the plunder had long been resolved. When Sakali led the army to Town Kidano and began to march to the capital, the Lord's Mansion issued a notice signed by Sakali to each town. After investigation, the major damage suffered by the 3 towns of Ista was not done by the subordinates of General George of the Warlock Fortress, but it was a shameless trick of the capital's regent Obsidian to provoke the hostility between the Warlock Fortress and the White Feather Estate. After citing a series of crimes of Obsidian, Sakali stated that the White Feather Estate would now respond to the call of the Dark Moon Princess Royal to firmly overthrow the evil forces led by Obsidian. If it was another estate, even the Dark Moon, it was impossible to deal with the capital with just a notice. They must mobilize and call in every possible way. However, the White Feather Estate was different. In order to obtain the faith power through the Wheel of Hera, the predecessor, Sakali spared no effort to use various means to deceive the trust and piety of the subjects. He turned the people of the White Feather Estate into fanatics. As long as Sakali said a word, even the capital would become the target of condemnation. Sakali reminded Shenrui of the General of Heaven who, "The heavens are dead and the yellow sky will rise," at the end of the Eastern Han dynasty. However, he had obviously seized the fruit of labor of the great master of this plane. The White Feather Estate, which was originally one of Obsidian's minions, had become a fatal knife that stabbed the back of the old master. "General, there are too many enemies. The soldiers are starting to lose their hold. General Dairu is dead. General Shiwen is dead." These bad news made Doran couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Several serious injuries on his body began to hurt. He was barely supporting with the soul-shattering greatsword. If it weren't for the guards who risked their lives to save him, he would have died under George's lion-toothed sword. I thought that I could already compete with the first general who had always been ranked above me after I crossed a small realm to reach the peak stage of the Demon Emperor a while ago. Unexpectedly, George Wales had already broken through to the Demon Overlord. Doran smiled bitterly. What made him even more desperate was that he had sent dozens of people to break out of the encirclement and ask for help from the Imperial Guards and the major families. But the palace and the elder families seemed to have evaporated. There was still no movement until now. Could it be? Fight to the death! Doran raised the soul-shattering greatsword and roared. Unlike the elder families, there was no way out since he chose obsidian back then. A villain who repeated his actions would be despised by everyone. Only a fight to the death. In front of the Dark Moon's military tent, the music of Tsuchin became clearer and more melodious. It was almost synchronized. In another surging movement, the soldiers who were advancing one after another under the illumination of the fire, the scarlet all over the ground reflected the two bloody moons, and the wailing of the lion-toothed sword that almost broke when the giant's sword collided with the lion-toothed sword. It seemed to have turned into dancing notes, pushing the theme of blood and fire to the climax. Chapter 537. Under the moonlight, the music gradually became inaudible. Jiao slowly opened her purple eyes and took a deep breath. Isabella, the song is very nice. Isabella gently put down Tsuchin from the veil. The name of the song is The End of the World. When a man taught me, he once said that even if the end of the world comes, he will accompany me. Really? The blonde princess smiled coldly, and the coldness in her eyes that was dispelled by the music began to solidify quickly again. Then you should also know that every time he said sweet things to you, he said the same thing in my arms. The implication of this sentence was that what you ate was just leftovers. Isabella's beautiful eyebrows couldn't help but raise. It seemed that the Princess Royal Highness was not a confused person. On the contrary, she understood much more than I thought. Ms. Intelligence turned her blue eyes and sighed. How can I compare with the noble Princess Royal Highness? Princess Royal Highness is the winner whether you win or lose. At least you can get the position of Her Royal Highness. There is only a princess who dies in battle, there is no queen who lives. Jiao's purple eyes flashed a trace of determination, but she retorted to her rival in love without backing down. Speaking of dying, the resurrection of Devil's Snare Flower is the real good news for those lascivious men in the capital. In the tit-for-tat conversation, both women seemed to be in high spirits. There seemed to be an invisible electric spark between the purple and blue eyes. It's already so late. If I don't go to bed, I will have dark circles under my eyes. How can I seduce that man? Isabella yawned and bowed slightly. Then I'll take my leave first, Your Royal Highness, who is in high spirits. After that, she ignored Jia and turned to leave. Isabella. Her footsteps wrapped in a cloak stopped. The song is very nice. But Princess Royal Highness added a sentence very stubbornly. I will let that guy play it for me dozens of times a day. Behind the veil, the corners of her purple lips curled up slightly. She didn't turn around and walked forward with graceful steps. The sound of the harp in front of the military tent ended, and the movement of the capital was coming to an end. In the west of the Dark Moon, another nocturne was quietly unfolding. For a vast territory, it wasn't uncommon to have a different sky phenomenon. There was no moonlight over the Shillong mountain range at this time, but dense dark clouds. Flashes of lightning could be faintly seen in the dense clouds, occasionally breaking through the darkness of the night. Drops of rain fell in the cold wind. Under the leadership of Gerent, the 5,000 troops entered the territory of the Dark Moon under the cover of the night and rain. This army was the elite troops that Gerent brought from the saber-toothed Tiger Legion of Tequila Fortress. In addition to outstanding combat power, what was more important was that they completely obeyed Gerent's command. Sergei, the son of the second General Doran Rus, was also among them. Sergei originally held an important position in the Red Devil Legion. He reached higher demon at a young age. Because of Athena, he mistakenly killed Alan, the son of the finance minister who was jealous of Athena. He was dismissed from his post and sent to Tekula Fortress to become a guard under Geraint. After Sergei came to Tekula Fortress, he started from scratch. After hard training, he had reached the intermediate stage of higher demon. This time, he went to the Dark Moon with the team with the determination to make contributions and make a comeback. He hadn't fought before. Now that he finally had a chance to perform, he was naturally in high spirits. The raindrops were getting heavier. Most of the rain in the demon realm was a little acidic. Even if the demons' bodies were stronger than humans, it was not suitable for them to be in the rain for a long time. However, the heavy rain in front of them had become the best cover for the surprise attack of the saber-toothed tiger legion. After this hill, the Wallen Fortress is in front. Geraint put away the glowing magic map, and his hand holding the Netherblood spear tightened. Warriors of the saber-toothed tiger legion, the amazing achievement of defeating the Dark Moon is right in front of us. Give those enemies who are still sleeping a real nightmare. Before dawn, the flag of the saber-toothed tiger legion must be planted on the city wall of the Wallen Fortress. The Wallen Fortress was a medium-sized fortress built against a mountain. It stood on the only way to enter the Dark Moon Avenue. In front of it was an open space that narrowed from wide to narrow. The terrain was like a gradually shrinking pocket. This fortress was not built for a long time. Behind the fortress was the similarly newly built town Wallen. Given that the northern part of the Dark Moon was at war, and the enemy was the powerful Capital Coalition army, many merchants of the Dark Moon city had withdrawn, but they did not completely leave the Dark Moon. Instead, they moved to town Wallen with a wait-and-see attitude. This had accelerated the pace of development and construction of town Wallen. It had become one of the most important hubs for trade in the West. Crossing the hill, Geraint wiped the rain on his face and looked at the fortress with soft lights in front of him. This time, it was really a blessing from the demon god. The rainstorm weather not only covered their whereabouts well, but the terrifying magic crystal cannons of the Dark Moon would also be greatly weakened in both accuracy and power. Geraint pointed the Netherblood spear, and the 3,500 infantrymen tried their best to conceal their presence and sneak toward the fortress. The cavalry carefully kept a distance and followed behind. Geraint had been vigilant about whether the opponent had set up an ambush. He silently calculated the distance until the army safely passed the effective range of the magic crystal cannons. Only then was he relieved. He ordered the soldiers to speed up and prepare to assault the fortress. At this moment, Geraint's ears suddenly heard a strange peep 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 sound in the rainstorm. A bad feeling suddenly surged in his heart, and he shouted, "Defense!" Unfortunately, it was too late. When Geraint reacted, the unknown murderous intention had already penetrated the darkness and landed on the infantrymen of the saber-toothed tiger legion. Judging from the screams, at least 300 people were killed. Immediately afterward, illuminating light balls were thrown out by some kind of spring and scattered. The entire battlefield in front of the fortress was suddenly illuminated. This was a kind of magic item commonly used in night battles. The light source could stay for a period of time. Geraint's heart tightened. The enemy is actually prepared for battle. It seems to be some kind of powerful arrow that killed my soldiers just now, but even the most powerful elf archer in the human world can't do it at this distance. The answer was revealed immediately. The second round of firing from the Wallen Fortress had begun. This time, Geraint clearly saw the true face of that terrifying weapon. This was a giant arrow, like a spear. Whether it was the range, power, or speed, it was extremely amazing. The infantrymen's shields were as fragile as paper in front of this terrifying arrow. A soldier was pierced through along with his shield and nailed to the ground. Then, the spear suddenly exploded, bursting out countless tiny arrows. The nearby soldiers all screamed in pain, and many of them fell to the ground dead. It seemed that the exploded arrows were poisoned. What kind of weapon is this? The power is actually so terrifying. Geraint was shocked. Ballista? No, it's definitely not an ordinary ballista. Due to the complicated loading and slow speed, the ballista has gradually faded out of the battlefield and was replaced by the magic crystal cannon. The weapon that appeared in the Wallen fortress today, which was suspected to be a ballista, exerted far more lethality than imagined. It almost subverted the current demon realm's common sense of ordnance. Gerent's face was already full of water droplets. Not only rain, but also cold sweat. This terrifying ballista has not been used in the previous battle with the Capital Coalition army. How many trump cards does the Dark Moon have yet to show? Infantry, disperse! Cavalry, follow me! Although the ballista was powerful, it was not enough to affect Gerent's determination to take down the Wallen fortress. He immediately issued an order. The cavalry quickly rushed towards the fortress, and another round of whistling sounds rang out. The time it took for the heavy crossbows to adjust and fire was quite fast, but this time the casualties were smaller. There were not many direct hits, but the poison arrows that exploded were still shockingly powerful, and many soldiers fell one after another. The distance between them gradually shortened. Arrows flew out from the fortress and poured down in the heavy rain. From time to time, cavalrymen and horses would fall. Blood mixed with the rain and was trampled on. The cavalrymen pulled their crossbows and shot back, attracting a group of firepower. The infantry behind them followed closely. Gerent's deputy general, Lakatos, who rushed at the front, ignited a strong blue flame with the long sword in his hand. He chanted a spell loudly, and a whirlwind surged toward the fortress. The rain brought by the whirlwind became extremely cold. Many arrows that were blown askew condensed into ice in the air and fell to the ground one after another. After a round of whirlwind, the fortress wall was actually frozen with a thick layer of ice. Many defenders also turned into ice sculptures. If it was another world, the ice castle would be more difficult for the attacker, but this was a world with magic. After the storm, a ladder made of ice actually appeared in front of the city wall. Lakatos was a mutated bloodline dark elf who practiced both martial arts and magic. He was proficient in both water and wind magic. He had the powerful strength of the early stage of the Demon Emperor. The amazing effect in front of him was mainly due to the advantage of the rainstorm weather. The saber-toothed tiger's infantry wore special gloves, and the soles of their boots also had auxiliary facilities like nails which were prepared in advance for climbing the fortress. Unfortunately, before the saber-toothed tiger infantry could get close, the ice ladders began to melt rapidly, turning into streams of water that sprayed out. The water seemed to be poisoned, and the soldiers who were splashed by it began to emit green smoke and scream in pain. Lakatos frowned. This enemy who turned the ice ladders into poison is actually very poor at using magic, but his control of water elements is still above me. With such an enemy, it is probably very difficult to rely on magic to climb the fortress. The sound of the ballista's spring began to ring again, and the soldiers of the saber-toothed tiger legion fell one after another. This radial terrain became narrower the closer to the fortress, which was quite unfavorable for the attacker. A thought flashed in Gerent's mind. The enemy's defense is extremely strict, and it is extremely targeted as if they are clear about the saber-toothed tiger legion's surprise attack plan, staffing, and strength. Could it be, traitor? Someone must have disclosed all the information of the surprise attack to the enemy. This was a trap that had been set up beforehand. A trap waiting for the saber-toothed tiger legion to plunge into. Including Gerent himself, only 3 people knew the overall plan. One was Regent Obsidian, and the other, Gerent couldn't help but shudder. He no longer had the extravagant hope of attacking the Wallen fortress. Now he only wanted to do one thing, which was to escape. Even if I am punished for defeat, I must expose the most terrifying traitor. Retreat! Retreat to town Leia immediately! Just as Gerent was retreating with the remaining troops, a group of black figures suddenly appeared and blocked the way. From the light of the illumination light ball, he could see that these enemies were tall and strong. They were wearing chain armor and holding heavy weapons such as axes, hammers, flails, and so on. Their heads were the most peculiar. It was a bull's head. Tauran! Gerent was shocked. There are at least 2,000 Taurans, which is equivalent to a large tribe. They definitely don't appear here by chance. Could it be that the Dark Moon also has a Tauren legion in addition to the Medusas and Wyvern legion? Taurens and Medusas are both highly intelligent demonic beasts. They can't be tamed like wyverns. Even in the entire fallen angel empire, there is no such special unit. I didn't expect the Dark Moon to have it. At this time, the gate of the Wallen fortress opened, and a large group of people rushed out while shouting. They were obviously going to surround the saber-toothed tiger legion from both sides and annihilate them here. Jarryn's heart sank. He knew that he was in a desperate situation. He raised the Netherblood spear, and his whole body was bathed in flames. He transformed into the battle form of a great demon and shouted, "Break out with full force!" The cavalries raised their spears and bravely rushed toward the Taurens who were blocking the way. The Taurens beat their chests and shouted together. There was a strange red halo under their feet, and they walked toward the cavalries with intimidating footsteps. The cavalries who rushed at the front were about to stab the enemy with their spears. Suddenly, a huge wolf-fawn hammer appeared above their heads. Boom! Before he could scream, his whole person and his horse were smashed into a pile of rotten meat. A similar scene played out in the next moment. The combat power of these Taurens was surprisingly powerful, and their equipment was unbelievably sophisticated. The cavalry's spears with the help of horsepower couldn't penetrate the silver chain armor on the Taurens. "Lactose! Try to break through! I'll hold the enemy behind!" Jarryn shouted, shook the reins, and rushed toward the rear with the cavalries. "Understood!" Lactose jumped up from the mount and floated in the air. He pointed the long sword in his hand at the rainstorm sky. Several lightning bolts suddenly fell from the sky, and they were attracted to the sword by a strange force. Lactose raised the long sword wrapped in lightning, flew toward the Taurens, and slashed down in the air. All the Taurens within a range of about 20 meters only saw the blue electric light flashing. They were knocked away by the high-voltage current before they could resist. The chain armor with super defensive power became an excellent conductor in front of the lightning. The Taurens who were knocked away by the lightning fell to the ground. They trembled all over and lost their combat power. This was still because the Taurens had anti-magic physique. If it were ordinary demons, they would have turned into charcoal. Lactose landed on the ground after a successful blow. As he was about to cast magic again, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He turned around and blocked with his sword. Sparks splashed, and he staggered back a few steps. Behind him was a Tauren who was taller than ordinary Taurens. He was holding a big axe and a huge shield in his hand. Judging from his breath, he seemed to be the mutated leader of the early stage of the Demon Emperor. Chapter 538. Lactose had the intention to kill this chief Tauren as quickly as possible and lead the soldiers to break out of the encirclement. He immediately chanted the spell silently. 8 thunder balls appeared around him, drew a staggered trajectory in the air, and flew toward the opponent. Chief Tauren didn't dodge. The giant shield in his hand danced into a gust of wind. This giant shield seemed to be able to isolate and disintegrate magic. The thunder balls turned into electric sparks and dissipated without a trace under the impact of the shield. In the blink of an eye, all 8 thunder balls disappeared under the clean shield attack. However, this was just a superficial attack that Lactose used to attract the enemy. When Chief Tauren defeated the Thunderballs, a disintegrated electric spark condensed into the ghostly figure of the Dark Elf Demon Emperor on the right. The long and narrow thin sword glowed with blue light silently slashed toward the Tauren's throat. The speed and assassination skills of the Dark Elves were the best in the demon realm. This sword concentrated the power on one point. The power was amazing, and the timing was quite precise. It was the difficult period when Chief Tauren's old power was exhausted, and new power had not recovered. It seemed that it was unavoidable. At the critical moment, the Chief Tauren suddenly did something unimaginable. He opened his mouth and actually boldly bit the sword with his teeth. Although the Tauren was not a magical beast that was known for its bite force, it firmly bit the sword that was going to take its life. Lactose's surprise was only for a moment. The territory power of his body quickly erupted. As he was about to kill again, he suddenly looked at something on the forehead of the Tauren. The thing was about the size of a gem. It was flashing with a faint red light. It seemed to be some kind of pupil. At the moment when they looked at each other, the pupil suddenly lit up with a scorching golden light. Lactose only felt that the world was spinning. His soul had a strong impulse to break out of his body as if he was summoned by the Grim Reaper. Lactose was in a daze. He instinctively sensed that something was wrong. He tried his best to urge himself to wake up quickly in his consciousness. However, at the moment when he was about to recover his sanity, a big axe with terrifying wind pressure had already struck his head. The soldiers behind saw General Lactose's sword was bitten by a Tauren, then he stood unsteadily as if he was drunk. In the next second, the dark elf was split by the axe, and the two pieces of corpse fell in a pool of blood. The chief Tauren spat out the long sword in his mouth along with two fallen teeth, howled at Lactose's corpse, and pounced on the next target. If Chinrui was here, he would understand the meaning of DeLong's howl. Unlucky bastard. Lactose was really unlucky. The third eye on DeLong's forehead was mutated from the Eye of Sauron given by Chinrui. It could greatly strengthen DeLong's defense. This was also the reason why he could bite the sword at the critical moment just now. Otherwise, it would not be so easy to lose two teeth. In addition, the Eye of Sauron also gave DeLong a special skill called Death Stare, which had a chance to launch a curse and cause the enemy to die immediately. The probability of launching Death Stare was very small, but Lactose was unlucky enough to encounter it. Originally, with Lactose's strength, he would not die immediately. It was just that his soul fell into temporary chaos, but in this kind of battle, this temporary was enough to determine life and death. Geraint still didn't know that his right-hand man, Lactose, was dead. He was facing many enemies rushing out of the Wallen fortress. Many of the infantry behind had fallen under the arrows of the pursuing army, and the front was blocked by the Taurens. If he continued to fight recklessly, he would only be annihilated. He must find a way to break through. Geraint set his eyes on the leading knight of the Wallen fortress. With a thought, he ordered the guards to rush toward the knight. Geraint's cavalry was equipped with long and short spears. The long spears were used for charging, and the short spears were used for throwing. Sergei and other guards were well trained. They threw short spears at the enemy. Dozens of Wallen fortress defenders were caught off guard and fell to the ground or fell off their horses. The leading knight immediately stepped forward on his horse. He waved the great sword in his hand, and the spears shot nearby were broken into several pieces. A red light flashed, and Geraint's figure appeared above the knight. At this moment, the pouring rain in the sky suddenly rolled back strangely, forming a vacuum force field created by the territory power. Geraint, who was in the center of the force field, shot out countless surging blood-red light snakes from his hand, shrouding the knight. However, the countless light snakes shook inexplicably. They stopped before they touched the knight. The blood-red color was quickly dyed blue, and the agile and winding body also became stagnant and slow. Immediately afterward, the vacuum force field shattered like glass. The blood-red light snakes disappeared and turned back into Geraint's netherblood spear. The tip of the spear was caught by a figure. The figure standing in front of the knight leader was burly. He was wearing a black half-body metal armor and a strange boxing glove on both hands, exuding an oppressive chill. He grabbed Geraint's netherblood spear with his bare hands and completely disintegrated this ambush. Geraint shook his wrist and shook off the boxing glove. The opponent's counterattack was launched like a shadow. This enemy's strength exceeded Geraint by a small realm, and his combat power was extremely powerful. He immediately put Geraint in a passive position. Seeing that Geraint was suppressed by his own powerhouse, the previous greatsword knight took off her helmet, revealing her purple hair. The valiant and beautiful face shocked the sharp-eyed Sergei in front of her. Athena! The daughter of the first general, the champion who defeated him in the youth swordsmanship competition, the beautiful woman who defeated him again in the Dark Moon barracks and refused his proposal in public had now become a shining star of the Dark Moon. She led the army to block the onslaught of the Capital Coalition army in the Moonlight Fortress again and again, and I, the son of the second general, am just a small guard of the saber-toothed Tiger Legion. It's fine if such an excellent woman doesn't like me, Sergei, but why is she so devoted to that cowardly and incompetent human?" Just when Sergei was full of resentment, Athena had activated her battle transformation. Fiery flames wrapped her body, and long curved horns extended from her head. Her hair and skin turned crimson. The raindrops evaporated before they fell on her body. That terrifying breath made Sergei tremble even at such a distance. This is by no means a higher demon. It's not even just a demon king. Great demon king? How is it possible? Sergei felt his hair stand up. The flame-like figure appeared in front of him in an instant, which was the densest area of the saber-toothed Tiger Legion guards. Then, he saw the great sword emitting a fiery red flame slashing toward this side heavily. Shatter! Annihilate! This was the last consciousness in Sergei's life, then his entire body shattered and annihilated with this feeling. In a fan-shaped area of tens of meters, under the magma-like fiery red power, both the guards and the horses were crushed by the terrifying power. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and there was not a complete corpse. Athena didn't know that there was an old acquaintance, full of envy and hatred among the dead souls under the sword. Her verdict, just now, was the skill of the quasi-artifact itself, and it also integrated with her own mutated bloodline's space ability. It was so powerful that no enemy could escape. This slash almost suppressed the morale of the saber-toothed Tiger Legion to the lowest point. No one dared to take the initiative to attack for a while. Geraint glimpsed this scene from the corner of his eyes. While he was distracted, he was punched by the opponent again. The fist energy carried a strange water element power. When it penetrated into his whole body couldn't move. Geraint didn't dare to continue fighting. He made a feint and activated his teleportation talent. As soon as he pulled away, his feet were inexplicably tightened. A pair of big hands suddenly appeared from the ground and grabbed his ankles. He couldn't move at all. Geraint was shocked. He stabbed the Netherblood spear downward, but he felt like he stabbed some metal. Sparks splashed, but his feet still couldn't break free. At this time, the enemy wearing boxing gloves quickly appeared behind him. A punch that was burning with a strong blue mist hit Geraint's back fiercely. Geraint's back armor suddenly dented, and a fist mark protruded from the armor on his chest, accompanied by the sound of broken bones. Geraint made a wah sound, and a lot of blood with ice shards spurted out of his mouth. This punch was extremely fierce, causing serious internal injuries. The opponent's next two blows froze Geraint's body below his chest, and he completely lost his combat power. When the saber-toothed Tiger Legion's guards and soldiers saw that Geraint was restrained, their eyes turned red. They didn't care about breaking through the encirclement, and they rushed over desperately. They were surrounded by the Taurens and the Wallen Fortress defenders. At this time, the thing that grabbed Geraint's ankles on the ground slowly floated out. This was a strange humanoid figure. Its body was made of rock-like material. Its facial features and muscles were relatively hazy, and its eyes emitted a faint green light. The blow from the Netherblood spear just now only left a slight scratch on its shoulder. "Earth Elemental!" Geraint almost groaned. The Earth Elemental's defense is the strongest. No wonder the Netherblood spear can't penetrate it. The question is, where did the Dark Moon get so many alien tribe reinforcements? There are even elementals. Moreover, it's even a Demon Emperor-level elite leader. This Demon Emperor-level Earth Elemental was Tag. Under the magical power of fertile Yuan soil, Tag successfully broke through to the Demon Emperor level. In order to help Chunrui, Earth Elemental King Morse sent Tag to the Wallen Fortress just in case. The rest of the Earth Elementals continued to absorb the power of fertile Yuan soil in the Earth realm. It would only be completed after 3 months. By then, more and more powerful elite Earth Elementals would be born. Tag saluted Athena, who came over, then he gradually sank into the ground and disappeared. His mission had been completed. He could return to the Earth realm through the teleportation circle of the Wallen Fortress to continue to absorb fertile Yuan soil. Geraint was confident that he would die, so he was fearless. It was just that Tag's respect for Athena caused a shock in his heart. Taurens, earth elementals, Medusas, wyverns, undead army, this time, the regent's conquest of the Dark Moon with a ridiculous reason was a lucky hit. He wouldn't know if he didn't fight, but he was shocked once he fought. The hidden power of the Dark Moon estate is too terrifying. If this continues to develop, the strength of the Dark Moon will expand to a terrifying level. By then, I'm afraid that even the capital will not have the ability to conquer the Dark Moon. Instead, it will be swallowed by the Dark Moon. Facing the valiant enemy commander, who was also the daughter of the Empire's first general, Geraint coughed up a mouthful of blood. He did not show any toughness or begging for mercy. He just said lightly, "I lost. It's not wrong to lose to General George." Athena put away her battle form and shook her head. "You are wrong. It was the Lord of Midnight Sun's Red Blood Flame army that defeated you." Geraint looked at the army flag that once shocked the entire demon realm. His expression was a little complicated. He sighed. "Let my soldiers go." Athena nodded and shouted. The encirclement of the Taurens and the Wallen fortress defenders immediately stopped. At this time, the saber-toothed Tiger Legion had suffered more than half casualties. There were only about 2,000 people left. "Put down your weapons and surrender! Otherwise, kill him!" Seeing Geraint controlled by Athena, the soldiers of the saber-toothed Tiger Legion did not hesitate and threw their weapons on the ground. "General Geraint, for the sake of these loyal soldiers, please don't have any extra thoughts." The implication was that if you dare to escape or commit suicide, all the captured soldiers will be buried with you. "Understood." Geraint smiled bitterly. "She is indeed the daughter of General George. Her style is exactly the same." The heavy rain was still pouring, and the sky began to show a gray color. The Wallen fortress had completely returned to silence. Only the blood that the rain couldn't wash away seemed to be crying about the loss of thousands of lives previously. Unlike the heavy rain in the Shillong mountain range, the sky in the capital was clear. The 2 white moons in the morning still had a bit of coldness that had not been erased at night. For most people in the capital, last night was a restless and sleepless night. Fortunately, the fierce fighting was finally over. The explosion no longer sounded, and the flames were all extinguished. The eye-catching thing was the mountain of corpses. They couldn't be buried on the spot, so they could only be dragged outside the city and burned. The carts of corpses attracted countless frightened eyes along the way. In this battle, the Red Devil Legion was completely annihilated. The Legion leader, the second general of the Empire, Doran Russ, died. Some family forces that were loyal to Obsidian were also mercilessly uprooted. The entire capital was under the control of the invading army. The strange thing was that this army did not attack the palace, and there were no atrocities of burning, killing, and looting. They were just stationed in the capital barracks, as if they just replaced the original duties of the Capital Legion. The slight difference from before was that the guards and patrols in the inner and outer city had increased several times. Neither the royal palace nor the elder families made any statement, and some of the administrative departments, in the capital, which were dominated by the elder families, operated as usual. Not only did they not have any conflict with the army, but they also showed a thought-provoking tacit understanding. Subsequently, there was news that the commander of this army was the first general of the Empire, George Wales of the Warlock Fortress. In addition to the elites of the Warlock Fortress, there was also the White Feather Estate army led by the White Feather Estate Lord Sikali. At the same time, the battle situation on the front line that had been covered before also became chaotic like snowflakes. The capital's Magic Shadow Legion raid failed, and General Nesta surrendered to the enemy. The Nether Hydra Legion was completely annihilated by the Dark Moon Army, and General Seymour died. The capital army was blocked at the Moonlight Fortress with countless casualties. It took them a long time to take down an abandoned empty fortress. Deputy Commander Pallor led the 3 legions and the Flying Cloud Legion of the Air Legion to be ambushed by the Dark Moon's undead army in town Daiko, and the entire army was almost annihilated. The power of the Dark Moon was far beyond imagination. The previous unsuspenseful crusade of 1,000,000 versus 100,000 had become an evenly matched tug-of-war. Coupled with the forces that occupied the capital this time, 3 of the 4 major estates were already enemies of Obsidian, actually 4. Judging from the situation in all aspects, the fallen angel empire was probably going to change. For a time, everyone's eyes were focused on a certain battlefield in the dark moon. This would be a real decisive battle that determined the fate of the entire empire. Chapter 539. Dark Moon. Over town Daiko, the purple moonlight was obscured by dark clouds. The thick haze in the sky was like the gloomy face of someone in the military tent below. Tomorrow was the date of the decisive battle, but the face of the Capital Coalition Army commander, and the fallen angel empire's regent Obsidian. Lucifer was gloomy, not because of nervousness, but because of the huge changes that had happened in the past few days. It was equivalent to being beaten several times by the opponent before the duel began. First of all, 2 days ago, a thunderous news gave Royal Highness Obsidian, who was full of confidence to conquer the Dark Moon, a blow to the head. The fallen angel capital was captured by the joint army of the Warlock Fortress and the White Feather Estate led by the first General George Wales. The elder families and the royal families who stayed behind defected to the enemy. The second General Doran Russ was killed in battle, and the Red Devil Legion was wiped out. All the trusted families were uprooted. In an instant, Obsidian almost thought that there was something wrong with his judgment. After confirming it over and over again, the intelligence in his hand had been burned to ashes by the uncontrollable, dark flame. George Sikali. The elder families. The royal families who stayed behind. Obsidian gritted his teeth and cursed the name of every traitor. The entire command center was almost turned into powder by the power of anger. Compared with General George, who had always stood on the opposite side of the enemy, Obsidian hated the shameless villain of the White Feather Estate, Sikali more. On the surface, he flattered the capital and used tricks to deal with the Warlock Fortress, but he secretly sided with General George and conspired to capture the capital. There are also the royal families and elder families who stayed behind in the capital. They actually joined forces with outsiders to stab me in the back. No matter how rich and threatening the Dark Moon is, it is just an estate, but the capital is the most important foundation of the entire empire. However, the current situation is already difficult to back down. Whether we stay put or retreat rashly to attack the capital, we will be attacked from both sides by the Dark Moon and the capital. The only solution now is to destroy the Dark Moon as quickly as possible, and then go back to the capital to give a thunderous blow to the rebels in the capital. When the news of the capital's fall came, only Obsidian, Josh, and a few lords and generals knew about it. Josh immediately proposed to block the news before the decisive battle so as not to shake the morale of the army. Josh's reaction and loyalty made Obsidian feel a little relieved. This suggestion was exactly what he wanted. He immediately ordered Josh to personally lead a team to inspect the various estates to prevent spies from spreading rumors. The distance between the imperial capital and town Daiko was quite far, and the channels for information to be transmitted were all through exclusive communication stations. Ordinary people could not know. Under the blockade of various means, the soldiers who were kept in the dark did not know that the capital had been captured. They were still eager for the arrival of the decisive battle. However, just when His Royal Highness Regent's heart was not completely at ease, he was slapped in the face again. Just this afternoon, the news that the capital was captured by the rebels suddenly spread quickly throughout the coalition army. What he feared had come true. Tomorrow was the day of the decisive battle. If something went wrong at such a crucial time, there wouldn't even be time to calm them down. Obsidian was so angry that he kicked Josh, who was in charge of supervision, to the ground. He blamed him for his dereliction of duty and wanted to punish him severely with military law. Josh quickly explained that he had been leading the supervision team to personally investigate the barracks for the past 2 days, and he had also placed spies in every barracks. He did not find any signs of trouble beforehand. According to the investigation, there were 2 sources of the news this afternoon. They were General Amste's Black Incubus Cavalry Legion and the Elder family's demon overlord, Legraro's men. These two people were exactly the ones who were present when Obsidian burned the intelligence. Josh then specifically stated that there was no conclusive evidence that the news was leaked at the behest of Amste and Legraros. This was probably the enemy's trick. Obsidian was originally suspicious. After the capital fell, he became suspicious of everyone around him. What he was most afraid of was that the elder families and royal families in the coalition army would betray him like those guys in the capital. Now, the news leak was like a fuse that ignited Obsidian's suppressed rage. Regardless of everyone's pleas, he directly captured Amste and Legraros and beheaded them in public. Beheading the general before the decisive battle was quite unfavorable, but in this sensitive and extraordinary period, Obsidian had already made up his mind. At present, the truth of the capital's capture could not be concealed. The morale had suffered a huge blow. Ordinary methods were difficult to work. He could only use the fastest and most effective bloody means to calm the people and the army's morale. From this perspective, these two people were the chickens used to warn others. Whether they were innocent or not, they must die. The execution of Amste and Legraros caused considerable agitation. Obsidian quickly made promises to all the soldiers to loot freely after defeating the Dark Moon, and he barely stabilized the situation. Obsidian understood in his heart that this stability was only on the surface. Only a big victory could truly stabilize the army's morale. In any case, tomorrow's battle must be won. We must defeat the Dark Moon's main force. Otherwise, if it continues to delay, once George leads the army south, the coalition army will fall into the danger of being attacked from both sides. On the other hand, there was still no news from Geraint, who raided the western part of the Dark Moon. Sometimes, no news was also a kind of news. By now, Obsidian was mentally prepared for the worst. However, even if Geraint's entire army was annihilated, it could also show that there was a considerable part of the Dark Moon's defense forces on the west side. Then, the main force of the Dark Moon army in town Daiko should be incomplete. There would be a higher chance of winning tomorrow's decisive battle. His Royal Highness Regent may not have realized it himself. The war that he thought had no suspense at the beginning, when did it need to be carefully calculated minute by minute? In Town Leith, south of town Daiko, in the central military tent of the Dark Moon army, Jia stood quietly alone in front of the hanging military map. Her emotions fluctuated. At this time, it was superfluous to study any strategy and tactics at the last minute. Whether it was a dragon or a snake, it depended on tomorrow's battle. The news that General George had captured the capital had already spread in the Dark Moon army. The soldiers were all excited. Just like what Jia said at the mobilization meeting before the decisive battle during the day, tomorrow's battle would be a battle to regain the glory of the red blood flame flag and rewrite the history of the fallen angel empire. In addition to the good news from the capital, there were also good news from the west. Athena successfully disintegrated the surprise attack of the third general of the empire, Geraint, at the Wallen fortress. Geraint himself was captured alive, and the 2,000 soldiers of the saber-toothed Tiger Legion became prisoners. Now that all the favorable factors that could be used had basically played a role, the key depended on tomorrow's battle. If Obsidian could be defeated in this battle, then her father's dream for many years and the heavy mission that she had been carrying would be realized. If she failed, not only would she lose troops, but her vitality would also be greatly damaged. Moreover, the capital and the forces that had been watching from the sidelines might rise. The previous plans would be ruined, and the Dark Moon would also fall into a desperate situation under the pressure. Whether it was for her, for Obsidian, or for the entire fallen angel empire, it was a real decisive battle. This battle had been waiting for since her father, the former crown prince of the empire, Grim Lucifer. After she took over as the Lord, although the Dark Moon had been in the difficult stage of being sanctioned and suppressed by Obsidian, she had never given up this belief. She had imagined the arrival of this battle countless times, but now that the extravagant hope had miraculously become a reality, there was a dreamlike feeling in her heart. Everything was because of that man, the miracle creator. Without that man, the Dark Moon would never have achieved what it had today. Perhaps she would still be the struggling princess. Without the Dark Moon, with that man's outstanding ability, he could also create dazzling brilliance on another stage. All kinds of past scenes appeared in front of her eyes like a picture scroll. Jia's undulating thoughts gradually calmed down. Only the faint warmth lingered in her heart, showing an unprecedented peace. Unlike the excitement generated when Isabella deliberately stimulated her fighting spirit previously, this was a real peace. There was no turning back. No matter what the outcome of tomorrow's battle was, she would not regret it. Just like when the man shouted, "For Princess Royal!" and rode alone toward the Red Spirit Estate's 100,000 army. Just like when a stupid woman opened her heart to him for the first time in the secret room. "I miss you very much. I just miss you very much." Jia closed her eyes gently. At this time, in the north of the Dark Moon City, a black horse crossed Town Jumo in the night and rushed in the direction of Town Leith. The speed of the black horse was extremely amazing. It even surpassed the speed of demonic beasts flying in the air. There was a black shadow lying on the back of the horse as if he was asleep. This black horse was extremely magical. Although it was fast, it was much steadier than ordinary mounts. No matter how steep the terrain was, it only made the owner behind it shake slightly. It would not fall off the horse. This person and the horse were Chunrei and the little black horse. After settling the capital, Chunrei learned the news that the Dark Moon and the coalition army had set a decisive battle. Since the 2 star points of the Star Gate were set in the capital when he stole the sword of Fallen Angel, he had rushed back to the Dark Moon directly. However, he still had a shortcut, which was the Rainbow Valley on the outskirts of the capital. Chunrei was now the real male owner of the Rainbow Valley. He could enter the valley and avoid those magic circles with his eyes closed. At this time, Rala was no longer in the Rainbow Valley. She obviously went to Town Leith to participate in the decisive battle. Chunrei used the space channel of the Rainbow Valley to quickly return to the Garden of the Dark Moon residence. At this time, the wyverns and flying demonic beasts of the Dark Moon City were basically transferred to the front line. Fortunately, Chunrei still had the little black horse that had been raised in the yard. Although there were many more detours on the ground than in the air, the speed of the little black horse should be able to make up for this deficiency as much as possible. When Chunrei used his understanding of the meaning of life to understand and touch the life form of the super system, there was an incompatible conflict, and also a subtle fusion. In the process of this contradiction and unification, a trace of understanding that couldn't be touched before was deepening, and the degree of compatibility with the super system was also increasing little by little. 1 day in the training ground was equivalent to 100 days. As time passed, the Fecta experience value in the status bar that had been stagnant began to jump at an amazing speed. However, Chunrei didn't know this. He had forgotten about time and himself. He was completely immersed in this mysterious realm of fusion. Not only that, in a long bag wrapped in black cloth on Chunrei's back, a sword that couldn't be stored in the storage warehouse was also quickly changing into an unknown light under the analysis of a certain skill. As the little black horse galloped like the wind, the morning sun had slowly brightened with a thin mist. Chapter 540. In the early morning, on the field in front of Town Leith, the 2 armies maintained an effective distance, facing each other from a distance. The number of these 2 armies was quite large. They were divided into several large blocks. If it weren't for the vast plain of Town Leith, it would not be able to accommodate them at all. The birds and beasts that usually occupied the plains had long since disappeared, and the invisible pressure caused almost everyone's face to reveal a solemn expression. Everyone knew that once this terrifying tranquility was broken, the killing intent that was nurtured in this place would erupt like a violent storm. In the center of the Capital Coalition Army, Commander Obsidian Lucifer narrowed his eyes slightly. His face was tense. He looked solemn and calm on the surface. But if one looked closely, the pair of purple eyes were full of fatigue and bloodshot. He obviously didn't sleep all night. Opposite the coalition army was the Dark Moon's army. Among them was the Dark Moon's commander, Jia, Lucifer, who was riding a white demonic horse and wearing silver-white armor. Although it was only the second time she really commanded the army in battle, compared with the last time she faced the Red Spirit Estate and Blue Lava Estate coalition army, Princess Royal showed extraordinary calmness. Jia! Lucifer! Obsidian's voice sounded, suppressing all the noise. I will give you one last chance, surrender! I can give you the position of Empress! Jia's cold voice echoed in the field. Obsidian! Lucifer! You are just a usurper who has not been recognized by the sword of fallen angel. You are not qualified to be an empress at all. What's more, you have even lost the capital now. Obsidian, who was stabbed in the heart, finally became angry out of shame. Those who obey me will live, and those who oppose me will die. I swear by the surname of the Lucifer royal family that all of you will be buried with this stubborn woman. The pressure of the peak stage of the demon overlord could not play a big role in this wilderness. However, as the highest ruler of the empire, Obsidian's fierce oath made by his surname did shock the Dark Moon army. In the past 300 years, we have lived in the barren Dark Moon, suffering inhuman sanctions and exploitation. In order to survive, we endured humiliation and let others trample on our dignity. Finally, one day, we used our own hard work and diligence to overcome famine and poverty. We were able to raise our heads and be human beings. We no longer had to bend our knees for a mouthful of leftovers. We were able to have a happy life and family. However, at this time, this traitor who usurped the empire, this cruel, greedy, arrogant, and shameless person, wants to plunder our hard-earned gains, wants to trample on our bodies and dignity again, wants to destroy everything we have. Tell me, generals, soldiers, my brethren, are you willing? No! The neat and loud voice of the Dark Moon army sounded. This kind of momentum was completely different from the War of Lords back then. It was full of fighting spirit and courage. The negative emotions brought by Obsidian's oath suddenly disappeared. Jia raised the royal flag high. Perhaps we will sacrifice our lives, but when we see the ancestors of the fallen angel empire again in front of the demon god, we can still raise our proud heads. The inheritors of the red blood flame flag, our eyes are burning with fighting spirit. Our sharp blades are ready to destroy the fragile enemy at any time. The will of the royal flag will guide us forward, and the inheritance of the Lord of Midnight Sun will give us the highest glory and courage. Warriors, fight for the Dark Moon, fight for the Empire. Fight! 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 The morale of the Dark Moon army skyrocketed. The neat sound of weapons and shields knocking made the entire wilderness tremble slightly. Similarly, the morale of the capital army was also trembling. Since Jia shouted, "Fight for the Empire!" the confidence of many soldiers of the coalition army began to shake. Although the Lord of Midnight Sun had fallen for 300 years, the legend of the top powerhouse and the top military god of the demon realm was still deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The coalition army had suffered consecutive defeats before, and the capital was captured by the first general, George, who supported Jia. People's hearts were wavering. Now facing Princess Jia, the lineal descendant of the Lord of Midnight Sun who inherited the red blood flame flag, and facing the powerful momentum of the Dark Moon army, their fighting spirit was almost suppressed to the bottom. Obsidian knew that if he continued to talk, the morale of the Dark Moon would not be shaken, but he would be discouraged first. At that moment, he didn't argue any more and ordered the frontmost infantry to attack. This light infantry had about 20,000 people. They were the elites selected from the Lord's army. They were led by Lord Suda of the Green Tree Estate. They were equipped with leather shields and armor. 5,000 of them were archers with strong comprehensive combat power. Obsidian sent out this infantry first, so he obviously wanted to test the situation. The light infantry formed several rectangular formations and marched toward the front of the Dark Moon army in a neat pace. Jia responded quickly. Several rows of soldiers went forward to greet them. The frontmost soldiers were the most powerful centaurs. The two of them jointly raised the tall giant shield. Due to the height of the giant shield, the situation behind couldn't be seen clearly. They seemed to be archers. Archers versus infantry? A sneer appeared on Obsidian's face. He ordered the capital's Boulderstone Legion to dispatch and kept a distance behind. The Boulderstone Legion was composed of heavy armor infantry and pike infantry, commanded by General Longbottom. Even if the opponent sent the magic shadow cavalry led by the traitor Nesta, it could be defeated. The troops on this kind of large-scale battlefield were not something that the commander could control freely by drawing a frame with the mouse in a real-time strategy game. Commanding hundreds of people was completely different from commanding 100,000 or millions of people. The more troops there were, the more difficult it was to command. It was usually difficult for the commander to command freely. Imagine, when many people in front retreated and fled, the people at the back had to retreat even if they didn't want to. Otherwise, they would be trampled to death. This was the so-called defeat was like a landslide. The better the army, the more they could execute orders, command as they wished, and exert the most powerful combat power. This not only required excellent commanding ability, but also strict training. Obsidian and Shay were like two chess players who sent out their own chess pieces. In addition to the chess player's own deployment, the specific army type and the quality of the chess piece's commander were also very important in the battle between the chess pieces. For example, generally, archers restrained spearmen, spearmen restrained cavalry, and cavalry restrained infantry. However, if the cavalry was properly commanded, it might not be impossible to defeat the spearmen. War was not a simple numbers game, but most of the commanders of the capital's individual army formations were famous generals who had experienced many battles. Obsidian's own experience was also better than Jia's. In this case, the capital army, which still had an advantage in quantity, had a greater chance of winning. On the surface, the Dark Moon's current advantage was only morale, but morale was very volatile. As long as the coalition army's momentum could be boosted with the battle formation, the morale of the Dark Moon army would naturally decline gradually. It was not difficult to win, at least in Obsidian's opinion. The coalition army's light infantry and the Boulderstone Legion's heavy infantry kept a distance, and they advanced forward at a neat pace. At the current safe distance, there was no need to accelerate. Obsidian had secretly ordered the cavalry team to prepare to launch. With Jia's command experience, it is definitely difficult to resist this continuous charge one after another. When the opponent is flustered, she will launch the full army charge in one fell swoop. At that time, she only needs to hold back those few dragons. After the Dark Moon army is crushed, the overall situation is settled. Facing the heavy infantry legion behind the light infantry, Jia still did not send out a response formation. She was just preparing something behind the slowly advancing giant shield formation. Soon, one ballista after another was pushed out by the goblin warriors, and the giant shield formation also stopped moving forward. Due to various defects, the ballista had been replaced by the magic crystal cannons. This kind of obsolete ordnance was only preserved in some backward places. Now the Dark Moon actually launched the weak ballista on such a critical battlefield. Even if Jia was incompetent, she should not make such a stupid decision. Obsidian couldn't help frowning. Suda and Longbottom also saw the ballista. At this time, the light infantry at the front was still quite a distance away from the conventional ballista's shooting range, so Suda did not panic. He just commanded the army to slow down a little. He was ready to accelerate and sprint after withstanding the first round of attack of the ballista. However, it turned out that Suda's slow command was a typical mistake of empiricism. What he shouldn't do the most was judge these ballista based on the conventional weapons he knew. When the infantry was still at a safe distance, the ballista had already begun to fire. The dull sound of the springs sounded one after another, and the rapid sound of braking through the air whistled. At the moment when the ballista was launched, Suda's voice finally had a hint of horror. "Disperse the formation!" As soon as this sentence was spoken, the spear-like huge ballista arrows had already flown into the dense phalanx at a terrifying speed. The fragile leather shields or leather armors of the light infantry were easily penetrated. Immediately afterward, the huge ballista burst open with a bang. In the scattered green smoke, countless short and sharp arrowheads burst out. The nearby soldiers were caught off guard, and they screamed as they were penetrated by those arrowheads. The green smoke was as toxic as the arrowheads. Many soldiers' bodies had begun to rot rapidly. When Gerent's sneak attacked the Wallen fortress, the poisonous smoke of the ballista could not be effective due to the heavy rain. In today's weather, it could exert its maximum power. Not only Suda and Longbottom, but even Obsidian and others in the coalition army had changed their expressions. They had never seen a strange ballista with such range and power. The Dark Moon has actually been hiding such a terrifying killer. After a round of shooting, about 2,000 soldiers had fallen due to the dense formation, and those ballista were quickly reloaded with new giant arrows. It was through a prop similar to a small capstan. Even the weak power of the goblin warriors could use it. It didn't have the shortcomings of the traditional ballista, which was slow to reload and difficult to control. The second round of ballista arrows flew out again, taking nearly 1,000 lives. The soldiers in the light infantry army had already shown timidity, but they were not allowed to escape without receiving the order to retreat. Otherwise, they would be directly beheaded by the military law team. Under Suda's order, the light infantry began to sprint, and Longbottom at the back also issued an order to accelerate. The power of the ballista was far beyond imagination. Even the iron shields equipped by the Boulderstone Legion could not defend against the giant arrows shot with such terrifying power. Compared with the giant arrows, what was more terrifying was the poisonous smoke. After dispersing, the roll of the ballista was indeed weakened a lot, but under the subtle control of the goblin warriors, it still exerted considerable power. Every round of shooting could bring considerable damage. After the distance between the two sides narrowed, the archers behind the giant shields began to move. The sky full of arrows rained down on the light infantry at the front. The skillful 3 consecutive shots coupled with the elite arrows brought a heavy blow to the light infantry. Before the two sides came into contact, more than half of the Suda infantry had been killed or injured. Although the heavy infantry at the back were attacked by the ballista, the burst arrows were much less damaging to the heavy infantry with iron armor. Instead, the toxins and poisonous smoke caused a lot of trouble. The number of light infantry was sharply reduced in the face of the arrow rain. All Suda could do was barely protect himself with his strength. As a great Demon King level lord, he could still rely on his strength to run amok in his own territory, but on this battlefield, he was just cannon fodder. The price of the light infantry was not in vain. The heavy infantry at the back had already approached. The lethality of the Dark Moon's arrows suddenly weakened a lot. At this moment, a lot of smoke and dust appeared behind the rows of giant shields. The sound of horses' hooves could be vaguely heard. It should be the Dark Moon's cavalry starting to dispatch. The Legion leader of the Boulderstone Legion, Longbottom, quickly ordered the scattered team to gather in formation, slowed down, and arranged the pikemen at the forefront. The pikemen in the hands of these soldiers were specially made to withstand the huge impact without being broken. For the sprinting cavalry, the momentum of high-speed running could certainly increase the speed and lethality, but it would also bring about a greater reaction force which would become a skewer on the pikemen. As for the defense against the ballista after the concentrated formation, Longbottom had a plan in mind. Because the enemy's cavalry was about to engage in close combat, if the ballista or arrows were fired rashly, it was easy to accidentally injure his own army. Regardless of this, the cavalry was much more difficult to train and at cost than the infantry. The enemy would definitely not be so stupid. Nesta, who surrendered to the Dark Moon, was Longbottom's old friend and old opponent. In the previous martial arts practice, he had always been suppressed by Nesta's magic Shadow Legion. Now, it was just the right time to show the newly trained spear array and eliminate Nesta's cavalry on the real battlefield. Sure enough, soon after, a large number of cavalry rushed out from the center and both sides of the shield formation. When Longbottom, who was ready to fight with Nesta, saw these cavalry, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. The Boulderstone Legion and the light infantry in front all showed horror. This is not Nesta's magic Shadow Legion. The black cloak was hidden in the armor. The hand holding the reins was not flesh and blood, but bones. Except for a few key parts, the war horse under him was made up of bones. Undead. Not the kind of cannon fodder skeletons, but the undead cavalry. If it was just a few Terror Knights, it would be fine, but the number of cavalry that rushed out in front of him had exceeded 10,000. The leader was dozens of Terror Knights riding ghost war horses. They were fully armored and holding spears. They led the undead cavalry to rush toward the Boulderstone Legion's phalanx. There was a commotion on the coalition army's side. When have I heard that the undead also has such a large-scale cavalry legion? How profound is the undead magic attainments to achieve this? When did the demon realm have such a powerful undead magician? And they are even on the Dark Moon's side. Judging from the number of cavalry, this undead cavalry must have existed for a long time. Otherwise, it is impossible to gather so many corpses. Whether it is the ballista or the undead cavalry, they have never appeared in the Battle of the Moonlight Fortress or Town Daiko. Those damn intelligence personnel! Obsidian gritted his teeth and clenched the reins in his hand. First Coalition Legion, Dark Incubus Cavalry Legion, Dragon Cavalry Legion, attack immediately! Goblin Brigade, prepare to set up the catapult! Chapter 541. Facing the terrifying undead cavalry legion, the remaining capital light infantry in front was almost wiped out under this round of impact. The commander, Suda, transformed into his battle form. The scythe in his hand drew a red stream of light. The approaching undead cavalry along with the skeleton warhorses were slashed into several pieces. However, the undead were not living creatures. The broken half of the body still had lethality. An undead cavalry on the ground slashed Suda's ankle with a scythe. Suda snorted and crushed the head of the cavalryman. The flames on his body burned even hotter. The scythe slashed out several half-moon light waves in the air, and the nearby cavalrymen were chopped down by these flying light waves. A Terror Knight appeared in front of the light wave. No one knew what method he used, but the light wave suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Terror Knight urged the armored ghost warhorse, and the spear in his hand glowed with a cold, sharp light. He rushed towards Suda as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the two sides had passed by each other. The ghost warhorse turned its head, and the head of the Terror Knight with the helmet suddenly fell off. Suda, who was motionless, suddenly had a terrifying wound pierced by a spear in his chest. Black blood was constantly flowing out. Unfortunately, this was not a mutual destruction. The Terror Knight stretched out his hand, and the helmet on the ground flew back to his hand. After he put it on his head again, two red lights appeared in the center. This scene was imprinted in Suda's collapsed pupils. There was an unwilling look flashing across his face. He finally fell to the ground. The heavy infantry of the Boulderstone Legion was also in danger. In front of the lethal sharp spear array, if it was Nesta's magic Shadow Legion, they would not use the most casualty method to charge directly. Instead, they would use the method of deterring or mounted archery to resist. However, the Boulderstone Legion was facing the undead cavalry who didn't know what death and fear were. They rushed directly into the dense spear forest. Unsurprisingly, the cavalrymen were injured by the spears. On the surface, it seemed that their tactic was successful, but in reality, it was not the case. The cavalrymen, including the skeletal horses, were all undead creatures. They would not die because of this injury. What was worse was that when 10 cavalrymen, dozens of cavalrymen, and hundreds of cavalrymen charged at the forest of spears with terrifying speed, the powerful impact was something that even the specially made spears and well-trained soldiers could not withstand. The spear formation only lasted for a short period of time before collapsing, and the heavy infantry behind them were even more unable to stop the cavalry's charge. At the same time, the ballistae continued to fire exploding arrows at the undead, ignoring both sides. To the undead, the most damaging explosive arrows and poisonous mist were completely ineffective, not to mention the arrows shot by the archers. "Hold on! Regroup the formation!" Longbottom commanded loudly, but it was difficult to stop the defeat of the Boulderstone Legion. The formation was broken by the cavalry, and the lives of many soldiers were ruthlessly harvested. Once they couldn't organize an effective attack and defense, the infantry couldn't compete with the cavalry at all, let alone the undead creatures that were like centipedes that died. In total, the Capital Coalition army had lost more than 30,000 soldiers, and the Dark Moon only lost some undead cavalry. The army at the headquarters had no loss at all. Of course, this was also related to the characteristics of the undead itself. Under normal circumstances, the undead would attack everyone except their own kind, so they were not suitable for mixed combat with other troops. At this time, the roar of wyverns came from the air behind. The capital's air reinforcements had finally arrived. At the same time, the ground cavalry's main force, the Dark Moon Legion, and the mixed infantry's 1st Joint Legion also began to dispatch. On the Dark Moon's side, the ballistae were still spitting out the poisonous tongue. Facing the capital army's dispatch, the Dark Moon quickly responded. A large group of skeleton soldiers appeared behind the cavalry. At the same time, the Cloud-like Air Legion rose from the Dark Moon army to greet the capital's Dragon Cavalry Legion led by Salgar. "What is that? Demon God above! Are my eyes playing tricks on me? Undead Air Legion!" What appeared above the Dark Moon army was not the Wyvern Legion, but the skeletons of a large group of flying demonic beasts. These flying demonic beasts included griffin, wyverns, and manticores. What they had in common was that their wing bones were attached with a layer of wing membrane condensed by a special substance. They could fly freely in the air. The cavalry behind them were ghosts. The most conspicuous one was the giant dragon, made entirely of bones at the front. This seemed to be the real skeleton of a giant dragon. The white bones were wrapped in a strange luster. The 2 empty eye sockets flashed with a faint red light. The aura exuded from its body made the wyverns on the opposite side scream in panic. They did not dare to approach. In contrast, the undead's flying legion, which was completely immune to the power of fear and charm, was not affected at all. Dragon's demeanor. Although it was not comparable to a real giant dragon, it was indeed the unique aura of the giant dragon family. It was the first time I saw such a terrifying undead creature. Salgar was secretly horrified. He took the lead to confront this terrifying bone dragon. The Wyvern Legion also barely suppressed their fear under the control of the cavalry, and fought with the undead's flying legion. The capital's Dragon Knight Legion was all wyverns. In contrast, the undead's flying legion was much inferior in combat power, but their number was 4 to 5 times that of the Dragon Knight Legion. In addition, those ghosts could also fly and fight in the air. They firmly suppressed the Dragon Knight Legion with an absolute advantage in numbers. If the Flying Cloud Legion was there, this situation would definitely be reversed. However, the Flying Cloud Legion suddenly lost contact with them during the raid on Town Daiko. None of the members, including the commander Rometti, escaped. It was estimated that the entire legion was wiped out. The Dragon Knight Legion had lost a lot in the Battle of the Moonlight Fortress. Now they were even more powerless. The skeletons of wyverns and demonic beasts were constantly falling from midair. Salgar controlled the Wyvern King to approach the Bone Dragon. After the lesson from the last battle with the Black Miss Long, Salgar was much more careful. After locking the target with magic power, he launched a series of tentative fireballs. The Bone Dragon did not evade and let the fireball hit its body. It only shook slightly, then the fireball turned into sparks and disappeared. The raw material of this Bone Dragon, named Ghost Dragon, was provided to Garatum by Chinrui. The source was the complete dragon skeleton used by Dodo when he pretended to be a ghost dragon in the Black Rainforest. After Garatum got this dragon skeleton, it was like he got a treasure. Under the inspiration of Chinrui, he finally successfully created the most powerful undead creature in the history of the demon realm. Although there were still some shortcomings, it was enough to be called the greatest masterpiece in Garatum's life. This dragon skeleton was a red dragon of the peak stage of the demon overlord. After it was made into a bone dragon, its power dropped by a small level. Although it lost the talent of controlling flames during its lifetime and was converted to the undead's undead attribute, the skeleton still retained a considerable degree of defense, and even immunity to fire magic. Although Salgar was an early stage of the demon overlord powerhouse who practiced both magic and martial arts, he definitely couldn't hurt the ghost dragon with fire magic alone. Salgar rode the mutated Wyvern King and circled around, keeping an effective distance from the bone dragon. Although he didn't know the fire-immune attribute of these dragon bones, he had already judged that the strength of this undead bone dragon was quite terrifying. He immediately shifted the attack target to the Terror Knight on the dragon's back. A long incantation was chanted. With Salgar's strength, the magic to chant the incantation must be quite powerful. The ghost dragon that was attacked just now recognized Salgar as an enemy. It didn't give him enough time and flapped its wings to pounce. Salgar's mount was a mutated Wyvern King, but its speed and strength were inferior to the Spectre Dragon's. If it wasn't a seasoned fighter, it wouldn't have been able to withstand the Spectre Dragon's ferocious aura. Fortunately, the Wyvern King reacted quickly. It glided to the side and dodged the attack. It circled back and spat a poisonous liquid at the Spectre Dragon. If it was Paglio's breath, it might be able to cause a lot of damage to the Ghost Dragon, but the Wyvern King's poison could not pose a threat at all. Salgar's incantation was finally completed. Several strands of purple lightning appeared out of thin air and fell on the head of the bone dragon. This powerful lightning seemed ordinary, but it was repeatedly compressed by magic power and incantation. The power that erupted was dozens of times that of ordinary thunderfall. In an instant, the huge body of the bone dragon was wrapped in scattered purple electric debris. However, Salgar soon discovered that something was wrong. There seemed to be an invisible circular force field around the bone dragon's body. The power of the powerful thunderfall was repelled outside this force field. The center of the force field was a hand, the hand of the Terror Knight. The force field gradually moved up and turned into a huge hand that grasped the purple lightning in the palm. Then, the huge hand squeezed and the powerful thunderfall actually disappeared. Salgar's face suddenly changed. Not only because he felt the powerful strength of the Terror Knight that was not inferior to the bone dragon, but the move that broke his magic was extremely familiar. He couldn't help but blurt out, "Sir Pegasus!" Pegasus. Lucifer, a famous powerhouse of the royal family. He could kill the enemy of the peak stage of the Demon Overlord when he was at the intermediate stage of the Demon Overlord. Unfortunately, he disappeared in the Battle of Town Daiko and his whereabouts were unknown. Unexpectedly, Salgar simply couldn't connect the royal family genius with the undead knight in front of him. While he was shocked, the Terror Knight's huge palm that crushed the lightning had already slapped toward him. Before Salgar could react, the Wyvern King under him had already instinctively felt the danger. It spread its wings and swept down, but it was still half a beat too late. Its left wing was shattered by the huge palm. It could no longer maintain its balance and fell down. Salgar's figure flashed and floated in the air. As he was about to cast magic to help the mount, the huge palm opposite him arrived again. Salgar was forced to block the attack, and his entire body was sent flying. The mutated Wyvern King, whose left wing had been shattered, struggled with all its might to keep flying. It was hit by the skeletal wyvern flying from behind, and fell into the undead army on the ground. Although the Wyvern King had managed to kill many skeletal soldiers, it was quickly drowned in the sea of undead. "Lielu!" Salgar yelled in distress. This mount had been with him for 100 years. They cooperated well and had a deep relationship. He didn't expect it to die in the hands of the undead today, but he had no time to grieve because the spirit dragon had flown over again and launched a fierce attack. Chapter 542. Compared with the stalemate on the ground, the advantage of the undead in the battle in the air was very obvious. They had suppressed the Dragon Cavalry Legion, especially the powerful Spirit Dragon and the Terror Knight behind it. They were invincible. If it weren't for the Dragon Cavalry Legion commander, Salgar, fighting desperately, perhaps the Dragon Cavalry Legion would have been defeated. Once the Dragon Cavalry Legion was destroyed, the Undead's air force would become the real nightmare for the Magician Legion and cavalry on the ground. The voices of the two dragons were getting louder and louder as if they were going to fight it out with their mouths. The sounds of fighting on the entire battlefield were suppressed. Although the appearance of the undead cavalry and air force previously made the coalition army a little numb because of the continuous shock, the soldiers of the capital still couldn't suppress the shock in their hearts when the Dark Moon's undead army once again broke the conventional understanding. The morale of the capital coalition army suddenly improved a lot. In the army, Josh, who was in charge of passing orders and monitoring, narrowed his eyes slightly. I actually don't know anything about these two dragons. It seems that Obsidian is quite wary of even the most trusted person. Why didn't you say that you and Rainieri are of the Blue Dragon bloodline when you were fighting to the death with him? I helped you kill him, so you should thank me instead. You still dare to ask me for benefits? The poison dragon's voice became louder. Don't think that I don't know your dirty thoughts. You must have received benefits from that Dairo today to come here. If we really settle the accounts from back then, you will still sneak attack me. Although many of the retreating Boulderstone Legion soldiers were injured by their own cavalry because they couldn't dodge in time, most of them had come near the first coalition army. They gathered together and continued to move forward unhurriedly. What an audacious undead! Unforgivable blasphemer! You actually used the noble corpse of the giant dragon to create this disgusting monster. The blue dragon spoke in a deep man's voice. Now I announce that you and your creator will use your life too. The Dark Incubus Legion charged left and right in the sea of the undead. They were unstoppable, and the skeletons that attempted to surround the heavy cavalry were scattered. Even the arrows that were shot from afar could hardly penetrate the heavy cavalry that had a strong defensive state. Ha! Tremble, ignorant fools! After today's battle, my name, Garadim Mammon, will be recorded in the history of the demon realm. The black-cloaked magician of the central bone tower laughed eerily. The Dark Incubus cavalry on the ground gradually approached the battle in front. The Dark Incubus Legion was the strongest heavy cavalry legion in the capital. Whether it was the knights or mounts, they were all elites. Even Nesta's Magic Shadow Legion was overshadowed by them. Shut up! Two long-winded fellows! The Black Dragon finally couldn't take it anymore and shouted angrily. Let's not talk about the past for now. What's going on with this ugly undead creature made from dragon bones? If you don't explain yourself clearly, don't even think about taking this lying down. Although the dark moon was rich, the time was too short after all. Even if there were 3 legions that were formed for a short period of time, special troops such as the Magician Legion and the Goblin Legion were still dwarfed. However, the Dark Moon not only had goblin warriors that were not inferior to the capital, but it also had an incredible undead army that consisted of almost all the troops. The pale yellow light was the strongest, incubus, skill of the Dark Incubus Legion. Although the buff ability was not as good as the Magic Shadow Charge, it could distribute the various buffs given by the magician to the entire army and double it. Under the premise of the Magician Legion's support, the power was far superior to the Magic Shadow Legion. It was the most terrifying force in the Capital Legion. Piglio! It really is you! The blue dragon's vertical pupils suddenly lit up, and he said viciously, I heard from Disjaro that the Dark Moon found a poison dragon. I knew it was you, a cowardly, shameless, despicable bastard. I have been looking for you all these years. You are afraid of my powerful power, so you disappeared for 2,000 years. It turns out that you are hiding here. Now it's just right. We can settle the old scores from back then. Humph. You have some power. It is the first time that Sir Daniel has seen a Terror Knight of the intermediate stage of the Demon Overlord. Unfortunately, that stinky breath of the undead. The blue dragon was about to say a lot of lines, but he was scolded by the female black dragon. He didn't dare to be verbose anymore. He spat out a ball of dragon breath which was even more powerful than the previous one. Obsidian's face was even more gloomy. Why would such an extraordinary character choose a weak little girl like Jia instead of me, the powerful regent? Although the undead had suffered a lot of losses, they did not have fear or morale. They still swarmed forward one after another. The first coalition legion at the back caught up, and the shield soldiers in the front row separated to both sides. Strong magic fluctuations emerged from the protected crowd at the back. It turned out to be the Magician Legion. This Magician Legion had a total of 5,000 people. The Dark Incubus Legion's body flashed with light one after another. There were red, green, and other lights in the pale yellow light. They were obviously blessed with several buffs. "Stop talking nonsense! Dismantle it!" The Black Dragon made a somewhat sharp female voice. Seeing the heavy cavalry's power, Obsidian's stiff face finally showed a smile. He ordered the second and third coalition legions to get ready to set off. No wonder the Dark Moon has so many unheard of powerful undead. The arrow charge formation, with the full state of incubus, was very powerful. Coupled with the characteristics of the heavy cavalry, the undead cavalry collapsed almost immediately. The entire Dark Incubus Legion was like an invincible arrow. Even the sea of skeletons at the back could not trap the sharp arrow of the incubus. This kind of attack route was mainly horizontal and diagonal. If the straight line was too deep, the two weak sides would be easily surrounded by the undead. A cluster of green energy suddenly appeared and greeted the blue breath. The green energy was quickly split by the sharp chi in the blue breath, but the blue breath also slowly disappeared without a trace because it was contaminated with the strange mist in the green energy. "I saw that Stardust pupil first!" the blue dragon roared. "Let's not talk about this first. Rainieri was killed by you, right? After all, he and I are both blue dragons. If you return the Stardust pupil to me now, then hand over half of Rainieri's treasure, then the account from back then will be cleared." There was a sudden tremor on the ground. Dozens of huge objects about 10 meters high emerged from behind the sea of undead. The layers were like small buildings. They were all made of various skeletons and were equipped with wheels that could be pushed by the undead below. There were many skeletons on each floor of the bone building. On the bone building in the center was a different magician. He was wearing a black cloak and seemed to be the leader. "Will I hide from you? You are using your face as a butt," Paglio roared. "You idiots still want to settle the old score with me? That time I snatched Rainieri's gem, and you actually want to take advantage of it. You deserve to be beaten up." Under the command of this magician, all the skeletons on the bone building began to attack. What shocked the coalition army was that it was actually a magic attack. The Dark Incubus cavalrymen, who activated the incubus state, formed an arrow formation. They raised their sharp spears, burst out with amazing momentum, and rushed forward. In the previous battle, the poison dragon Paglio and the dragons Oliphius played a huge role. They were the biggest reliance of the Dark Moon army. Unexpectedly, the capital also had dragons. The first coalition army responded in time. The magicians launched an attack under the command of the Legion commander, Wallspun. The overall strength and number of these magicians were slightly higher than the skeleton magicians. Although the skeleton magicians used the special effects of the bone building to make up for these gaps, the magician's ability to flexibly use various offensive and defensive magic was incomparable. The cooperation was even more incomparable. The same kind of magic launched together would produce more than 1+1 superposition effect. Especially the large-scale group attack magic of Meteor Shower, which caused huge damage to the undead. Skeleton magicians. The appearance of these two giant figures caused the Dark Moon army to be restless. Giant dragon. And it is from the direction of the capital army. The blue dragon immediately stopped talking, and a cluster of dark blue dragon breath sprayed toward the spirit dragon. The Dread Knight waved his hand, and the vacuum force field appeared. Under the effect of the force field, the rapid dragon breath suddenly slowed down. However, this dragon breath not only carried the breath of thunder and lightning, but also a strong, sharp breath. It was like countless magical weapons that cut the force field into pieces. The Dread Knight had already used both hands to constantly fill the gap in the force field. He finally eliminated the power of the dragon breath, but the entire body of the spirit dragon had been involuntarily pushed more than 10 meters away by the huge power. The original leader of the Dark Incubus cavalrymen was General Amsti, but Amsti became a scapegoat because of the leak of the capital's fall. He was executed by Obsidian, and the former Deputy General, Rondo, took over as the Legion commander. The original unstoppable arrow formation of the Dark Incubus cavalrymen was constantly being reduced and slowed down. Rondo knew that those bone towers must be destroyed, but the location of the bone towers was too far back. In front of them was a sea of skeletons. Not to mention the current state and strength of the Dark Incubus, even in his previous peak state, he couldn't break through the sea of skeletons and directly reach the bone towers. "Daniel!" A huge figure appeared in front of the spirit dragon. It was a brown dragon in black armor. Many knowledgeable people in the Coalition Army and the Dark Moon Army were surprised. Garadim. Mammon. The most famous undead magician 2,000 years ago. It is said that the undead magic was pushed to an unprecedented height by him. He could almost be a unique system. Unfortunately, he disappeared later. Unexpectedly, he reappeared in the demon realm 2,000 years later, and he even stood on the Dark Moon's side. The strong one was the blue dragon who was good at wind magic, and the other was the relatively thin black dragon. The two dragons flew to the sky above the battlefield and stared at the spectre dragon made of bones. Aren't skeletons the lowest level of undead cannon fodder? How can there be a magician? After witnessing the terrifying strength of a series of undead legions, the Dark Incubus Legion did not rush to assist the Boulderstone Legion or launch an assault. Instead, they stopped. Under Rondo's command, their bodies lit up with a pale yellow light at the same time. Just like the charge skill of the Magic Shadow Legion, this was a group skill that relied on magic tattoos and equipment to activate. It could greatly improve the corresponding ability within an effective time. At this moment, two huge figures appeared in the sky above the Capital Coalition Army. They flapped their wings and came to the front of the spirit dragon that was chasing Salgar at a terrifying speed. The bone tower seemed to have some kind of special power. Not only could it greatly increase the range of these magic spells, but the additional curse power was also constantly weakening the incubus state of the Dark Incubus cavalry. For heavy cavalry, magic defense was originally a weakness. Moreover, with the curse power, the power was suddenly reduced. Coupled with the encirclement of the undead melee soldiers, they were in a mess for a while. The casualties suddenly increased. At this time, the heavy infantry of the Boulderstone Legion was left with less than one-fifth of the strength under the impact of the undead cavalry. Longbottom was very familiar with the Dark Incubus Cavalry Legion, so he never retreated to the friendly army. Instead, he ordered the soldiers to stall the enemy with all their strength. He took the lead and was seriously injured. He was almost killed by the lurking demon emperor-level vampire, but he never retreated. Now that he saw the Dark Incubus Legion began to charge, he ordered the soldiers to disperse and retreat at full speed. Chapter 543. You will let it go if you explain it clearly? Chick, do you think I just came out of the eggshell? Peglio smiled contemptuously. I know you. Aren't you the miss of the Dragon Island's bloodline? Don't use those stinky rules of the Dragon Island to suppress me. I'm originally a lonely soul, so I don't fall for that. This skeleton belongs to my enemy, so I made him into a slave. How about this explanation? Stop talking nonsense. If you want to intervene in this battle, speak with your fists. Peglio knew that the consequences would be very bad if the spirit dragon was caught by the mists of the Dragon Island. However, these two dragons came with bad intentions anyway, and the old enemy was there, so a battle was inevitable. Moreover, the source of the spirit dragon was Chenrui, so he simply took on the whole thing. Very good! The black dragon's sharp voice had a hint of ghastly, and his body exuded a cold breath. Dear, don't be angry, leave this guy to me. The blue dragon Daniel gritted his teeth and said, I will let this simple-minded guy with well-developed limbs taste the taste of dragon magic. If you don't feel satisfied, you can sneak attack from the side. Let's beat him up together. This blue dragon was obviously very shameless. On the surface, he said it was a one-on-one fight, but he actually wanted to fight 2 against 1. Even if the black dragon didn't make a move, it would also cause a lot of psychological pressure to Piglio. Piglio had a greater chance of winning. The poison dragon was powerful and good at hand-to-hand combat. Moreover, the poison was fierce. Even the physique of the crystal dragon couldn't resist it, but he was weak in magic. If he faced the black dragon who was weak, he would have a greater advantage, but in front of the blue dragon who was born with the power of the wind element, he was much more passive, especially when Daniel was also the best in dragon magic. Piglio knew that these two giant dragons were powerhouses of the peak stage of the demon overlord. Daniel's strength was comparable to his back then. If there was another equally powerful black dragon, he was definitely not his opponent. However, Master Poison Dragon also had the excellent quality of being cunning and shameless. Suddenly, he thought of a past event, and he already had an idea. Daniel, you couldn't pursue that woman back then, so you chose this Dragon Island chick? Piglio looked like he was recalling. The woman you pursued back then? Ms. Black Dragon's ears immediately pricked up. She threw the matter of the spirit dragon to the back of her mind and shot a scrutinizing gaze at a certain male. Daniel didn't expect the poison dragon to bring up this old matter. Feeling the sharp gaze of his wife on the side, his momentum was suddenly weakened. Although the blue dragon's wind magic was powerful, the black dragon was the nemesis of magic. This was the main reason for the difference in family status. When Master Poison Dragon saw that there was a chance, he continued to add insult to injury. I remember, it was 3,000 years ago, Daniel seemed to have a crush on a beautiful female dragon. He went forward to confess his love, but he was chased by her until he pissed his pants. Daniel hurriedly interrupted. Nonsense! There's no such thing. It was clearly that crazy woman who had a crush on me. In order to get rid of her, Before he finished speaking, there was a strange magic fluctuation in front. This magic fluctuation was so powerful that everyone on the battlefield felt it. The peak powerhouses, including Obsidian, were all moved. Even the black dragon, who was almost immune to magic, showed a cautious look. A bespectacled woman wearing a dark blue dress appeared in front of the three giant dragons. This woman had a slender figure, and her long purple hair was coiled into an elegant bun. She also wore a pair of glasses, and she was brimming with intelligence and astonishing beauty. When the blue dragon Daniel saw this beauty, his dragon eyes almost protruded out. He heard a pleasant but terrifying voice coming out. Crazy woman? She even has a crush on you? Daniel never thought that he would meet this woman here. His intestines were green with regret. Although he and Piglio were enemies back then, they also appreciated each other, and were very familiar with each other. Only now did he understand why the bastard poison dragon's wording was beautiful female dragons, instead of the usual crazy woman. I just confidently said that this guy is simple-minded, but he is obviously full of vicious schemes. Danielle! Who is she? The black dragon's voice suddenly increased. This stunning woman who made her feel a strong sense of crisis also had the breath of the dragons. Even if she transformed into a human form, she was not as beautiful as this woman. Julia, listen to my explanation. As soon as the blue dragon's explanation started, he saw a short staff in the hand of the beautiful woman with glasses. Then, there was a strange distortion in the space. In an instant, the blue dragon, the black dragon, and the woman disappeared. Master Poison Dragon secretly patted his little heart that was thumping. He secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, I was alert just now. Otherwise, the crazy woman might be involved. Although the black dragon's physique is special, if I encounter the crazy woman, I will most likely suffer a big loss. In the capital army, Obsidian's face had become quite ugly. This woman is obviously from the Dark Moon's side. Judging from the terrifying fluctuations just now, I am afraid that even I am not her opponent. The two strongest helpers that I have spent a lot of money to find are actually offset by the mysterious woman. Seeing the dense enemy troops below, the poison dragon's eyes flashed with violent, murderous intent. He spouted several clusters of dragon breath from his mouth. These dragon breath contained a highly toxic mist. It had killed tens of thousands of capital soldiers in the Battle of the Moonlight Fortress. The Legion leader of the Magician Legion below, Wallspun, had been paying attention to the dragon in the air. He immediately ordered the magicians to work together to cast protective magic. Layers of translucent protective shields appeared above the army. The highly toxic dragon breath quickly corroded the protective shields, but there were too many magicians below. They constantly replenished their magic power, and finally, the dragon breath was gradually disintegrated and eliminated. However, Paglio's dragon breath was very scattered. The magicians only defended the area above them, but the soldiers outside the magic shield were not so lucky. The green smoke became a death trail. Countless soldiers who could not dodge in time were turned into ashes by the terrifying toxicity. It had to be said that in this battlefield environment, the poison dragon's lethality was incomparable to any kind of dragons. The formation on both sides of the First Coalition Legion was suddenly in chaos. As the poison dragon was about to continue to wreak havoc, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Before the figure could be seen clearly, several huge thunder balls flew toward Paglio. Paglio's figure shook, and he had turned into a human form. He punched continuously with both fists. Before the thunder balls could get close, they were all shattered in the air. The figure was a white-haired woman with an old face. She was his old opponent in Town Daiko last time, Stiller, who was once the top magician under Midnight Sunday. Stiller and Old Cowan were known as the two strongest demon overlords of the elder families. They had always been quite conceited about their magic. However, the appearance of the beautiful woman with glasses just now brought a strong shock to Stiller. Just the magic fluctuation that was as vast as the sea made Stiller feel her own insignificance. In the eyes of an expert like Stiller, the subsequent disappearance was clearly the lost space magic ability, and the operation was natural without any trace, as if this woman herself was the source of element and magic. Stiller regretted that she didn't see more of this woman's means, but she was also glad that she was not her enemy. As for the poison dragon in front of her, he was also a very powerful enemy. It was difficult to win if she fought alone, but it was still easy to restrain him. Besides, she was not alone. Two figures appeared behind Paglio, Barocco and Disjaro. Both of them were at the peak stage of the demon overlord. Although the poison dragon once boasted in front of Chunrei that he could deal with dozens of powerhouses of the same level and that his strength was close to the fallen angel emperor, Sakya Union of the demon god's wings, the three people in front of him were not rookies who had just advanced. They were all veteran peak stage of the demon overlord, especially Stiller. If the three of them joined forces, it would be difficult for Paglio to resist. There was a green woman next to Paglio. There was a green crystal that seemed to be an ornament between her eyebrows. She sneered, "You want to bully my man by relying on numbers? Crobulus!" Stiller and Disjaro, who rarely showed up, did not know this green-haired woman, but Barocco had occasionally seen the traitor, who was once a high-ranking palace consultant. He said sternly, "You traitor, you actually dare to attack us? I'm a dragon's. I'm just staying in the capital temporarily. I haven't been loyal to anyone at all. I can go wherever I want. Obsidian knows it himself. If you are not convinced, I will feed you a mouthful of dragon breath with my mouth." Crobulus was quite powerful when she was furious, but the latter sentence was Paglio's loss no matter how one looked at it. At this time, several more figures appeared in the air. On the capital side, in addition to the Dragon Rider Legion's Salgar who returned, there were three demon overlords, Stebel, Faravit, and Lunters. There was also one more demon overlord on the Dark Moon's side, which was Vanim, Toro, who surrendered to the Dark Moon last time. On the other side, the Spirit Dragon also flew over with Pegasus, who was transformed into the Terror Knight. The lifespan of ordinary demons was 200 to 500 years. The lifespan of the royal family was relatively longer. After reaching the middle-level strength, the lifespan would be extended by about half, and the high-level powerhouses would be extended by double or more. The lifespan of a demon overlord-level powerhouse may reach about 1,000 to 2,000 years. Dragons were an exception, but behind their long life was an extremely low fertility rate. Otherwise, they would have dominated the demon realm long ago. As for the demigod powerhouse, it was said that their lifespan could no longer be calculated by ordinary standards. These were all concepts under normal circumstances. Real powerhouses grew up in constant battles. The path of growth was full of dangers. A careless mistake would put one's life in danger. If the earthen pot didn't leave the well, the general would inevitably die in battle. Even the demon overlord level powerhouse would inevitably fall. Demon overlords were not cabbages. As the former top empire, although the fallen angel empire's foundation was strong, it was not infinite after all. Apart from the demon overlord who stayed in the capital and the previously dead demon overlord, the 7 demon overlords in front of him were all the trump cards that Obsidian could bring out. The same was true on the Dark Moon's side. Originally, Rala was the strongest hidden force, but she was unexpectedly restrained by the 2 dragons that appeared suddenly. Now there were 5 demon overlords including the spirit dragon. Moreover, the spirit dragon and Terror Knight who were transformed into the undead had lost their bloodline talents. Especially the spirit dragon, if there was no one to control it, it would only have a certain fighting instinct without wisdom. Its strength would definitely be discounted. Originally, Oliphius could be added to the Dark Moon's side, but Oliphius's duty was to protect Jia because there was also the biggest boss, Obsidian, in the opposite army. "Stop talking nonsense! We can't fight freely here, so we might as well find a place farther away to have a good fight." Paglio pointed to the distant mountain range. The demon overlords of the capital quickly exchanged opinions and nodded. If it was 7 versus 5, their chances of winning were still very high. Paglio also had his own little calculations. As long as he delayed these people and waited for Rala to win, then the hope of a comeback was quite high. Somehow, although the Black Dragon was the nemesis of the magic department, Paglio still had confidence in Rala. He completely forgot that this madwoman was once the most terrifying enemy. Perhaps even Master Poison Dragon himself was unwilling to admit it. This should be a kind of trust in a partner. The demon overlords disappeared over the battlefield, and the battlefield below also entered a white-hot stage. The coalition army blew the horn of retreat for the front army. The purpose of retreat was to regroup and prepare for a general attack. The Dark Moon also began to blow a similar horn because if the opponent launched a general attack, not only the undead at the front would become real cannon fodder, but the Dark Moon army at the back would also be crushed into pieces under that kind of momentum. Both sides began to adjust their formation quickly. The undead army was concentrated on the right wing of the Dark Moon. The center was the Flame Legion led by Jia and Tim's Moon Shadow Legion, while the left wing was the Red Blood Legion led by Kagiran and the Azure Legion led by Simon of the Blue Lava Estate. The whole formation was slightly sharp, while the capital's formation was somewhat similar to a pincer with a larger angle. Formation was quite important in war. Both large and small teams had considerable knowledge. For example, the previous phalanx of the Boulderstone Legion. The heavy infantry formed a long horizontal line with several deep rows. The formation could cover and cooperate. When the infantry in the front raised their spears, they were like a huge hedgehog. If ordinary cavalry encountered this phalanx, the casualties would be quite heavy. Of course, the phalanx was not invincible. In addition to the unconventional breaking of the formation by the undead cavalry just now, the terrain was also a factor that must be considered. When the dense phalanx moved on the rugged ground, it was easy to cause overall disconnection and fragmentation. If this was not a plain but a rugged mountain road, the power of the phalanx and heavy infantry would be greatly reduced. In the forest, the light infantry's guerrilla formation and tactics would exert far more power than the heavy infantry. The same was true for large-scale wars. It was usually a cooperative operation of multiple arms, so there were more factors to consider. There was an old saying in the demon realm: the light infantry is the hands, the cavalry is the feet, the heavy infantry is the chest wearing armor, the flying soldiers are the wings, and the commander is the soul. Although this old saying did not include magician, archer, ordnance, and other arms, it briefly elaborated the essence of war cooperation. The demon realm's famous generals who were good at commanding troops did not reach the demon overlord level due to talent or energy problems, but they were more valued by the Empire. The battle formation of both sides was finally adjusted. Almost at the same time, the horn of the final attack sounded. This would be the biggest and final duel that determined the outcome. Looking down from the air of the Leith field, the two huge crowds gradually approached the center. The closer they were to the center, the faster they were. In the blink of an eye, they had intertwined and collided. Chapter 544. No matter which plane, there was always endless cannibalism among intelligent lives. From a certain perspective, it was this history written with the blood of the same kind that drove the so-called civilization forward. At the moment when the two torrents of people converged, almost everyone lost their superfluous feelings, leaving only the most primitive and instinctive killing actions of their bodies. The violent Force Legion on the capital's right flank was led by a mutated centaur who had reached the highest level of Great Demon King among the centaurs. His power was very violent. Every time he swung the hammer in his hand, dozens of people in front of him would be smashed into pieces. However, under the continuous bombardment, the centaur's movements became slower and slower. Finally, due to exhaustion, a Demon King-level general of the opponent desperately slashed on his knee. He was on the verge of collapse. The Dark Moon soldiers who were in a killing frenzy behind swarmed up, and they quickly passed the centaur. There was only a corpse full of injuries on the ground, like a tiger being gnawed into bones by countless man-eating ants. In a large-scale charge of more than 1 million, the power of an individual seemed so insignificant. Only the Demon Emperor-level powerhouse who had comprehended the power of territory could have a better ability to protect himself in this environment. At least, he could escape. The premise was that there was no Demon Emperor-level opponent on the enemy's side. The battlefield was filled with blood and violence. Those who hesitated, were cowardly, and fled would often die even faster. The soldiers of both sides were in a killing frenzy. Only a few experienced generals could maintain a clear mind and command the soldiers to use the smallest price in exchange for the greatest number of casualties. The undead were the only ones who could maintain the calm state of the entire army because they didn't know what excitement or fear were except for individual masters. Especially the crazy bombardment of the skeleton magicians on the bone tower behind the undead formation, which made the First Coalition Legion and the Second Legion suffer. If it weren't for the Magician Legion, perhaps they wouldn't have been able to hold on. The Magician Legion's magic was very sharp, but firstly, they didn't have the range increase of the opponent's bone tower. Secondly, they had to cast their magic from behind the heavy protection. They didn't dare to be fearlessly pushed to the front to attack like those skeleton magicians. They all knew that the best way to destroy these undead was to eliminate Garatum. Unfortunately, this legendary undead magician was not only powerful, but also extremely cunning. He had been hiding in the farthest bone tower. There were 2 Demon Emperor-level generals who took the risk to kill him. Before they barely broke through to the bone tower, they were torn into pieces by the hidden vampires near the bone tower. The magic power of the Sorcerer Legion was not endless. Soon, they could only take turns to recover and attack. Bottles of energy recovery potions and even white potions that could increase magic power for a short period of time were drunk regardless of the cost to maintain the intensity of the battle. However, the potency of the potion would become lower and lower after repeated use, and the lower the purity of the potion, the more negative effects it would have on the body. Long-term dependence on potions could even lead to depression. The effects of the potion would become weaker and weaker, resulting in permanent damage to the mind or body. Unless it was the potion with 100% purity in Shinrei's super system, then the damage could be avoided. However, even if it was a potion that was exchanged, the reduction in effectiveness was inevitable if it was taken continuously. Especially the higher level potions would overdraft the potential. For example, the white potion and black potion, that enhanced potion must be taken at a certain time interval, otherwise it would be useless. What made the capital's left wing suffer even more was the flying undead legion above their heads. The Dragon Rider Legion had been completely controlled by the opponent in the absence of the commander, Salgar. The Magician Legion, whose magic power had been greatly reduced, was getting more and more difficult to defend against their attacks. Although the melee soldiers in the front were brave, it was difficult to support under the pincer attack. The formation shrank uncontrollably, and the area of the undead was gradually expanding. Contrary to the advantage of the Dark Moon's right wing was the Dark Moon's left wing. The Blue Lava Estate's Deputy Legion leader, Summon, was the former Deputy Legion leader of the Azure Legion. Although the soldiers risked their lives, they were still inferior to the capital's elites in terms of strength. The general at the forefront of the capital's right wing was the former Coalition Army's deputy commander, Pallor. The fiasco of Town Daiko caused Pallor to suffer a great blow. Although his injury had not recovered, he insisted on fighting as an ordinary general. Now Pallor wanted to use the Dark Moon's blood to wash away the shame, so he was very desperate. If it weren't for the Red Blood Legion led by the Kaguran siblings to resist, the Dark Moon's left wing would have been defeated by the enemy. The most important part of the entire battle was the middle army lineup, and the battle situation was also the most intense. There were 50,000 of the most elite Imperial Guards and 5 elite legions with a total of about 35,000 to 60,000. They had never been used in the previous wars. In this decisive battle, he finally used all the direct main forces, which put the Dark Moon's middle army on the opposite side under tremendous pressure. Under Jia's command, only the Moon Shadow Legion and the Flame Legion had less than 200,000 troops. They were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers, but the strength of this middle army was not trivial. This group of Flame Legion soldiers were elites tempered by Athena using the training method provided by Chenrui. They had been transformed by the Devil Fruit. Whether it was their individual strength or overall cooperation, they surprised the capital's elites on the opposite side. They forcefully resisted the powerful impact of the opponent with a small number. The Moon Shadow Legion did not have the strong close combat strength of the Flame Legion. They were mainly distributed at the rear of the Flame Legion. Tim had trained a large number of excellent archers in the Wallen Fortress in Mountain Shilong. They were mixed with the Medusas and had powerful long-range shooting abilities. In the center of the archers was the Magician Legion commanded by Monroe, the son of Crawford, the Bloody Vine Flower Estate Lord of the Shadow Empire. This group of magicians were not undead creatures, but Crawford's reward for helping the Dark Moon solve the mineral vein problem in the Crystal Valley. Like Tim, Monroe's combat power was not strong, but his commanding ability was outstanding. The Magician Legion did not rush to launch large-scale magic that consumed magic power. Instead, they focused on buffing their allies for the time being. Originally, this long-range formation's defense was relatively fragile, and it was prone to air attacks. However, the Dragon Cavalry led by Lomont in the air made up for this deficiency well. The capital's air power was suppressed by the undead on the right wing. The sky of the middle army basically became Lomont's world. The sound of the magic bombs thrown down by the wyverns could be heard from time to time in the capital's army. These were still within the scope of conventional warfare. What made the capital's elites palpitate the most were two things. The first was the strange metal men in the front row. There were hundreds of them. Their strength ranged from higher demon to demon king. Their characteristic was amazing defense. Magic was basically useless against them. What was even more terrifying was that they had obviously fallen to the ground and died, but they began to resurrect after a period of time and went on a killing spree unless their bodies were completely destroyed. These were the gold men made by Rala. They were originally used as housekeeping robots. After being inspired by Chenrui, they were made into fighting machines similar to crystal puppets. The speed of the gold men was relatively slow, and they had extremely strong anti-magic attributes. As long as their core was not destroyed, they could fight again after recovering for a period of time. They were excellent meat shields. The second thing that frightened the capital army was the ghost-like black-robed magicians hidden in the Flame Legion. These magicians didn't have any lightning or flame attacks. They used an unpopular magic, Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion was one of the undead magic. It could use the strange dark elements to induce the explosion of corpses to hurt the surrounding enemies. However, the power was relatively small. However, the corpse explosion created by these magicians was much more powerful. Not only the explosion itself would hurt nearby soldiers, but the exploded corpses would also emit a strong poison, causing a large number of soldiers to be poisoned. Of course, it was the capital army that was poisoned. The gold men at the front were not afraid of this poison. This was no longer the traditional corpse explosion, but poison explosion. Only Garadam's clone projection could perform this kind of magic. These 5 magicians were all split projections of Garadam. Although their strength was only at the Great Demon King level, the power of the improved poison explosion was quite impressive. The only drawback was that it consumed too much spirit power, so it couldn't be performed continuously. Even so, the capital army still did not dare to get too close to the position of the magicians. Despite this, the capital army still had the upper hand by relying on the advantage of numbers. More importantly, Obsidian, who was at the center core, had not made a move yet. The battle situation in the center of the two armies was in a stalemate. While the 2 flanks were strong and weak, one retreated and one advanced. As time went by, except for the position of the center army which remained basically unchanged, the angles of the 2 flanks had rotated. The number of both sides was also decreasing sharply in the bloody battle. This was not only a contest between individual and overall combat power, but also a contest of endurance and willpower. Whoever could not hold on first would be the loser. Although the Dark Moon Army was extremely valiant, the disadvantage of numbers gradually manifested when the overall combat power was slightly inferior to the opponent. Especially in the center army, there were less than 100 golems left now. 3 of Garadam's 5 clones were destroyed. The Magician Legion under Monroe had begun to take turns to rest. The number of wyverns in the air was reduced by nearly half, and all the magic bombs were exhausted. Even the Medusas and archers began to have casualties. The situation was precarious. Jian knew that once the center army was defeated, then the entire Dark Moon Army would collapse without any suspense. At that moment, she ignored the danger and personally came to the front to supervise the battle. Under the encouragement of her taking the lead, the morale of the Dark Moon Army was greatly improved. For some reason, as time went by, the momentum of the capital army gradually weakened. Many soldiers in the center army, left wing, and right wing began to show unexpected fatigue. Their waving of weapons also slowed down. The Dark Moon Army naturally would not let go of the flaws exposed by the enemy. They stepped up the attack and reversed the previous crisis. Obsidian, who had been observing the situation in the core of the capital's center army, finally moved. He appeared at the forefront of the front line in an instant. His murderous eyes locked on Jia's figure not far away, completely ignoring the Dark Moon Army that swarmed over. Obsidian lifted the black cloak and slowly blocked in front of him, then he swung it. Blood rained everywhere. The soldiers in front had turned into minced meat, and bones scattered on the ground in the blink of an eye. Even the sturdy golems were shattered into dozens of pieces, clearing a bloody fan shape of about 30 meters. The awe-inspiring voice resounded throughout the battlefield. Jia! Lucifer! A rebel who dares to go against his superior! Do you dare to fight with me? Chapter 545. It was not rare for the commander of the two armies to duel, but as everyone knew, Obsidian was at the peak stage of the Demon Overlord, and Jia was only at the early stage of the Demon Emperor during the War of Lords. The gap between the two sides was huge. They were not on the same level at all. This seemingly disgraceful challenge was simply a pretense to dampen the morale of the Dark Moon. However, Obsidian was really not bluffing this time. Previously, he had been calmly observing the situation on Jia's side. After confirming that there was no hidden powerhouse around Jia, he rushed over without fear. As long as he killed or captured this Princess Royal who was against him, the entire Dark Moon Army would collapse without a fight. The surrounding Dark Moon Army knew that the commander was in danger, and they all rushed over regardless of their lives. Obsidian did not entangle with these minions. He turned into a stream of light and rushed toward Jia. Along the way, there was blood everywhere. Seeing that he was about to approach the target, the space in front suddenly became chaotic and distorted. A girl in black armor instantly blocked in front of the stream of light. Black Dragon Cannon! A huge black ball wrapped in dark blue destructive energy ejected from the girl's fingertips and flew toward the stream of light rapidly. At such a short distance, the stream of light could no longer dodge, and it collided with the black energy ball. The surrounding ground shook violently. The stream of light was slowly pushed back by the black ball. A huge crack like a deep valley appeared on the ground along the way. Within 100 meters, the slightly weaker soldiers were evaporated into smoke by the terrifying energy and disappeared. The stream of light suddenly stopped retreating, then the people on the nearby battlefield felt that the light dimmed. The Black Dragon Cannon actually disappeared with a bang. Obsidian's figure appeared in the stream of light. There was still a light smoke on the glove of his right hand. A sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. As expected, only this black dragon is left beside Jia. This black dragon is the intermediate stage of the demon overlord, only one step away from the peak stage, but in front of me, the veteran peak stage of the demon overlord, there is no chance of winning. Oliphius was taken aback. Black Dragon Cannon was actually crushed by the enemy with one hand. In terms of power alone, Obsidian has already caught up with Paglio. Oliphius only hesitated for a moment, then she flew forward and launched a fierce attack. Obsidian always responded with only one hand. Most of the unarmed combat movements in this world were concise and practical without too many fancy moves. Fists were the most used, legs were less used. An attack method similar to the flicking fingers of the elder family's demon overlord Old Cowan was even rarer. In contrast, Oliphius's leg technique looked very gorgeous, and her speed was extremely fast. Her long legs were like a whirlwind. Obsidian was careless for a moment, and his cheekbone was scratched by the wind from the leg. He only felt a burning pain. His arm quickly blocked Oliphius's leg, and a terrifying aura burst out. Oliphius's entire body flew out backward. She turned a somersault in the air to remove the force, and she barely stood still. Obsidian's cloak was swung back in a half circle, and the terrifying wind pressure turned nearly 100 ambushers at the back into pieces, including a projection of Garatum. He said to Oliphius sternly, "If you dare to stop me again, I will kill you without mercy." It was not that Obsidian was merciful, but because the giant dragons were unreasonable guys. Today, the people from the Dragon Island happened to come again. Julia was also a black dragon. Judging from her previous attitude toward the giant dragon skeleton, if he really killed this black dragon in front of him, perhaps there would be additional problems. Therefore, Obsidian wanted to shock the other party and let her back off. Oliphius looked at the bloody scene behind Obsidian, and there was a trace of fear in her heart. Mom said that a dragon must have professional ethics. Miss Obsidian thought of the countless rewards promised by a certain human employer, and he gave birth to courage in his heart. He kept encouraging himself. "I just have to hold on until Rala or Paglio come." Thinking of this, Oliphius regained her courage. Her fingers began to shake quickly, not because of fear, but because she was quickly preparing a new attack. This move was taught by Paglio. She used a mysterious technique to gather power at the tips of the 5 fingers, gathering the attack power at one point to launch the strongest blow. Obsidian saw a woman with a veil protecting Jia and retreating. He didn't want to be entangled with Oliphius, so he suddenly accelerated and flew toward Jia. The woman with a veil glanced at Obsidian, and her left eye glowed with a faint golden light. Obsidian only felt a slight pain in his head, and he quickly used his spirit power to resist, but it had returned to normal after a while. However, at this moment, Oliphius' figure appeared behind him, and she raised her leg and smashed it at Obsidian's back. Obsidian instinctively grabbed with his backhand, but he missed. It turned out to be a feint. Miss Obsidian had already bent down and circled to Obsidian's left side with the inertia of this kick. Her 5 fingers formed a claw with faint black silk, and she grabbed at Obsidian's heart in a split second. Obsidian had just used his spirit power to resolve the strange spirit impact issued by the masked woman. He hurriedly crossed his hand, and he felt a tingling pain coming from his wrist. It turned out that Oliphius's grab almost penetrated the glove on his wrist. Obsidian roared and punched Oliphius away. Obsidian was really angry with this blow. Oliphius vomited a mouthful of blood, and she landed unsteadily. She staggered a few steps and sat on the ground. Her 5 fingers hooked a glove which was just torn off. It should be a precious equipment. Ms. Miser quickly kept it into her storage equipment. Obsidian looked at the faint red mark on his wrist, and his face was full of hostility. Black flames appeared on his fist, and a strong destructive breath spread around from him. Oliphius was startled. She shook her body and turned into the black dragon's body. She barely flew up and spurted a dragon breath at Obsidian. Obsidian just moved sideways to avoid the dragon breath, and his fist wrapped in dark flame hit the black dragon fiercely. The bystanders could only strenuously see a black shadow flashing around the black dragon at lightning speed. The ping-ping sounds of high-speed strikes rang out, and the black dragon would occasionally let out a blood-curdling screech. Many of the scales on its body were melted by the terrifying black flames. The black dragon knew that the target was too big, so he changed back to his human form. As he was about to escape, he was punched in the back by Obsidian. He fell to the ground far away, and he could no longer get up. Obsidian's figure slowly landed. As he was about to kill, the previous spirit impact suddenly came into his mind again. This time, Obsidian was already prepared, so he was not affected. He turned around and grabbed the short sword shot by the masked woman in the air. He snorted coldly. "You are quite courageous. You actually dare to." Before he finished speaking, the short sword in his hand suddenly burst open, and a green smoke quickly filled the air. Obsidian felt the danger contained in this smoke, so he quickly activated his body protection power and flew back. "Go quickly!" the woman shouted, and Jia had already picked up Oliphius. Oliphius's consciousness had been blurred due to serious injuries. This voice made her seem to return to a scene in the depths of her memory. It was also the same sentence. Go quickly. Recently, she had been having this kind of nightmare. Damn woman! Obsidian's left hand that previously grabbed the short sword began to tremble. There were countless small cuts on it that had begun to corrode. This should be the venom of the poisoned dragon. If it was a few minutes ago, even if the short sword burst open, it would not hurt Obsidian. However, the gloves with protection and enhancement just happened to be destroyed by Oliphius, so he was shot while lying down. Obsidian tried his best to suppress the spreading poison in his left hand. He hated the masked woman who used the trick to plot against him. He punched the masked woman in the air. The woman was fleeing toward the main army. This punch arrived first even though it was launched later. Although it was far away and the effect of the dark flame could not be exerted, the power of the peak stage of the demon overlord contained in it was still terrifying. The woman's back was hit, and she immediately spurted blood. Her veil was dyed red, but she used the force to escape at an amazing speed. Obsidian did not chase after the woman. He set his gaze on Jia, who was running away with Oliphius in her arms. His figure flickered, and he quickly flew toward the crowd where Jia was. A large circular translucent shield appeared to protect this area. It turned out that this was the Magician Legion of Monroe where Jia was. The remaining 900 or so magicians worked together to launch this magic shield. Even Obsidian could not break it in a hurry. Obsidian hated the black dragon who hindered his plan. If it weren't for Oliphius just now, Jia would have been captured or killed by me immediately. There would not be so many twists and turns. At this point, I must kill Jia as soon as possible. Otherwise, when the poison dragon or the more terrifying woman appears, I'm afraid I won't have this chance. Obsidian's face was gloomy. 3 pairs of holy light wings appeared behind him, and he punched at the shield. With each punch, the shield trembled, and the cracks on the surrounding ground increased rapidly. Lomont in the air discovered the crisis and immediately led the Wyvern Legion to rescue. However, the power of the peak stage of the demon overlord was too strong. The wyverns fell one after another. Lomont used the power of the evil eye tyrant to launch the holy light wings, but it had no effect on Obsidian, who had activated the holy light wings. Instead, the power of the evil eye was rebounded back by the heart of light and dark. Both Lomont and the Wyvern King were stunned to the ground. The circle of protection magic was getting smaller and smaller. The Dark Moon's 1,000-man magician legion was originally the elites under the Dark Shadow Empire's third general, Crawford. If they were in their best state, with the protection skills launched by the combination of secret methods, even if Obsidian had holy light wings and dark flame, he would not be able to break it in a short time. However, the magician's spirit power had been almost exhausted since the battle. The effect of the supplement and buff potion had weakened, and the trembling of the shield had become unprecedentedly intense. Boom! The entire shield finally disappeared under Obsidian's strong attack. The magicians whose spirit power was overdrawn fell to the ground, and dozens of magicians on the edge were smashed into pieces by the aftermath of the punch. If Rala was by Jia's side now, it would definitely be another situation. Unfortunately, the two Dragon Island's giant dragons were an accident, especially the black dragon that was almost completely immune to magic. Rala, who was originally an ambush, could only be offset for the time being. The changes on the battlefield were indeed difficult to completely control with plans. Obsidian's eyes were fixed on Jia, who was supporting Oliphius in the center. An invisible pressure containing the power of the territory shrouded the hearts of everyone around, and they were unable to move for a while. I'll give you one last chance. Be my woman and servant, and I can still consider giving you the position of Empress. I only belong to one man in my life. Jia put down Oliphius with a hint of sarcasm on her face. Today, there is only Jia who died in the battle, and there is no Empress who lives in vain. Her body began to burn with black flames, her purple pupils became black and white, and two pairs of light wings appeared behind her. Obsidian shook his head. Dark flame, heart of light and dark, and holy wings. Although I have awakened the 3 talents, they are only average. They are not even mutated bloodlines. I just inherited Grimm's power. It is a bit unexpected that you can reach the peak stage of the Demon Emperor after the War of Lords, but with this strength, so what if you burn your life? As he said, the pressure on Obsidian's body had instantly risen to the extreme. Kneel down! Lead your army to surrender to me! The Dark Moon's strength was obvious to all. If Jia surrendered, the wealth and remaining military power of the entire Dark Moon could be taken into his pocket intact. Moreover, keeping Jia alive might also be recognized by the Sword of Fallen Angel. If there was really no other way, it would be easy to kill her in the current situation. Under this powerful pressure beyond the realm, Jia's knees began to tremble. She desperately supported the ground with her sword and stubbornly persisted. The dark flame that burned with life became hotter and hotter. As her blonde hair fluttered, the black and white colors in her eyes began to emit a strange light. With a whoosh, the dark flame turned into a ball and wrapped Jia in it. The burning rhythm became more and more strange, causing the surrounding space to be filled with a mysterious rhythm that coincided with the nature of heaven and earth. Obsidian's face changed. Damn it, she actually broke through! Thanks to my help, Jia is actually going to break through? Bang! Obsidian punched the ball of dark flame. The fireball did not move, but his fist was bounced back by a huge force. He involuntarily took a few steps back. The ball suddenly turned into black and white, revealing an ancient and vast breath. This breath was like a heavy punch in Obsidian's heart. He trembled as if he saw something he was most afraid of. Obsidian couldn't be more familiar with the strange breath of Heart of Light and Dark. Lord of Midnight Sun. The brother that I fear the most, the top powerhouse who is invincible in the demon realm. How can Jia have the unique Heart of Light and Dark breath of Midnight Sun? This is definitely not Grimm's inheritance. Could it be that Midnight Sun is not dead? Obsidian shuddered. No way. Although I didn't witness the death of Midnight Sun at the time, I saw the corpse with my own eyes. It is definitely true. According to the old patriarch of the Samo family, Herluz, who was the only surviving witness at that time, Lord of Midnight Sun was killed by a human powerhouse. Almost everyone present died. Herluz himself also died due to the serious injury shortly after returning to the demon realm. The death of Lord of Midnight Sun should be a fact. Otherwise, how could the demon realm army be defeated? It's just that Midnight Sun has been dead for so long. A few hundred years later, his power of light and dark appeared in Jia's body again. How can this be explained? Obsidian didn't know that the power of light and dark that Jia was now exuding was the crystallization of fertile yuan soil that Glorfin transferred to the Earth Elemental King. Back then, Glorfin was severely injured by the power of Heart of Light and Dark. Speaking of which, the source was indeed the Lord of Midnight Sunday. The dark flame gradually dissipated, revealing Jia's figure in the center. The holy wings on her back had become 3 pairs. The ancient and boundless meaning of the black and white pupils in her eyes had disappeared. The power around her body was rapidly undergoing mysterious changes. Judging from the breath on the surface alone, there was a qualitative leap compared with before. Demon Overlord! Obsidian's murderous intention was very strong. Jia was only in her 20s, but she had already become a demon overlord. Her potential was almost limitless. Coupled with the power breath that was suspected to be the Lord of Midnight Sun, this woman gave me a great sense of crisis. I must not let her live no matter what. The woman had come to Obsidian's side, and her voice became smaller. That man has something to tell your highness. That man really didn't die. Obsidian's attention had completely shifted from Jia. When he was listening attentively, the woman's voice suddenly rose. Oliphius! Let's go! The thing in the woman's hand behind her back suddenly lit up, and it contained terrifying destructive fluctuations. There was another battlefield in the mountains far away from the plains. Intense tremors and loud noises kept sounding out. Smoke and dust flew in all directions, and several figures intersected at an unimaginable speed. The ground nearby seemed to have been shaved off by several layers, and exaggerated cracks and damage could be seen everywhere. Bastard! The elder family's demon overlord, Baroko, climbed up from the huge pit on the ground with a disheveled face. If it weren't for Stiller, who cast a magic shield for him in time just now, his heart would have been dug out by the poison dragon. In the battle of the demon overlords on both sides, the capital should have an absolute advantage. There were 3 peak stages of the demon overlord, Baroko, Stiller, and Disjaro. The intermediate stage of the demon overlord was Salgar, Stebble, and Faravit. There was only one early stage of the demon overlord, Luntz. The dark moon only had 1 peak stage of the demon overlord. The intermediate stage of the demon overlord included Miss Long Crobolis, who had recently advanced, Vanim, Toro, who surrendered to the dark moon, plus Pegasus and the spirit dragon, who were transformed into undead. Considering the situation of Pegasus and the spirit dragon, especially the spirit dragon's current state where it couldn't leave the controller, its actual combat power could only be regarded as 1.5 intermediate stage of the demon overlord, or even less. 7 versus 5 was equal to 7 versus 4. It was only a matter of time before the capital side won. However, the plan could never keep up with the changes. The real situation was the complete opposite. There were strange traps everywhere in this mountain area, and the magic circle that even the peak stage of the demon overlord was afraid of. The 7 demon overlords of the capital had been suppressed by the opponents so far and suffered a lot. There is no doubt that this is a trap set long ago. No wonder the insidious poison dragon deliberately led everyone to this place. Too cunning. Too shameless. The long sword in Disjaro's right hand released thousands of sword lights and attacked Paglio. Paglio flashed slightly and had already hidden far away. Before the sword lights could catch up, they encountered some invisible resistance and were disintegrated. The poison dragon's figure appeared ghostly behind Disjaro. The holy light wings appeared behind Disjaro. His left hand that was burning with dark flame slashed backward like a blade. It hit Paglio's body, and it actually burst open. Disjaro felt that the dark flame was rushed into his body by a strange force, and he felt very uncomfortable. The Emerald Dragon's attack in front of him had arrived. Half of Disjaro's armor was frozen by this blow containing the water element power. As he was about to melt it with the power of dark flame, Paglio's true body and fist appeared in front of him at the same time. Due to the freezing, Disjaro had no time to dodge, and his defense was greatly reduced by the Overlord armor's armor strip, halo. The poison dragon punched his chest fiercely. As the ice chips flew, the armor suddenly had a fist mark embedded in the flesh. It was still emitting a faint green smoke. Disjaro snorted and took 7 or 8 steps back in a row. Ignoring the severe pain, the wound on his chest quickly burned with black flame, barely suppressing the terrifying toxin. The poison dragon was about to pursue, but Stiller's lightning fall had arrived. Paglio screamed and appeared behind Venom out of thin air, blocking Stebble's blow for him. "Shameless dragons!" Stiller shouted angrily. She was the only person on the capital side who was not injured so far. It was not that Paglio gave preferential treatment to women, but Stiller's magic power was powerful, and she had quite a few protective means. Even so, she still couldn't crack that kind of advanced magic trap. She couldn't even find the way out of this damn place. "This is called using your brain, idiots!" Paglio sneered. This was the home ground that he shamelessly asked Rala to set up together a few days ago. It was mainly based on dragon inscription, and there were also some magic circles that implied ancient runes. It also had a considerable interference effect on territory power. Due to time and material problems, this formation could only be maintained for 1 day. For now, it was enough. In the current situation, the poison dragon and Crobolus, who were familiar with dragon inscription, were the main attackers. The 2 undead creatures and Venom were in fixed positions for defense, but they actually had the upper hand. The original plan was for the poison dragon, emerald dragon, and black dragon to lure those demon overlords to duel here. Rala lurked next to Jia to prepare a sneak attack on Obsidian, but the appearance of the 2 giant dragons on the Dragon Island disrupted this deployment. Paglio knew that Oliphius could not stop Obsidian, so he only hoped that she could try her best to delay time. When he or Rala dealt with the enemy, they could turn the tables in one fell swoop. Although the poison dragon had the upper hand, the strength of the opponent was not trivial after all. It was still quite difficult to win in a short time. In the middle of the battlefield in the wilderness, the expected explosion did not appear. The veiled woman fell to the ground, and her wrist was nailed into the ground by the purple long sword. Obsidian's eyes turned black and white. The destructive thing that was floating in his hand dimmed quickly under the wonderful power of Heart of Light and Dark. "Want to plot against me? You damn traitor!" Obsidian's face was full of ferociousness. A rope-like purple light was emitted from his hand, binding Isabella. "This traitor involves the huge secret of the human, Charles. She can't die before I interrogate her." There was no fear in Isabella's eyes. Instead, there was a kind of liberation from life and death. Perhaps this kind of liberation had long existed in her heart, so she was so reckless of life and death. As the head of an intelligence department, she had more than one way to turn herself into a corpse, even in this kind of confinement. It was just that what made her anxious was that Oliphius, who was holding Jia in the distance, did not follow her previous instructions to escape with Jia to Paglio's battlefield. Instead, she stood there blankly as if she was scared silly. "Oliphius, run!" Isabella endured the severe pain in her wrist and shouted again. Facing Obsidian, who was approaching step by step, Oliphius still stood there stupidly. She didn't even notice Jia breaking free. It was not out of fear. Her mind was buzzing at the moment, full of that voice. "Run! Oliphius, run! Oliphius, run!" The scene seemed to overlap with a nightmare in the depths of her memory, and the voice became another familiar intimacy. "Oliphius, run! In the nightmare, she was just trembling all over. She was scared silly and didn't dare to move. She watched the figure in front of her being pierced through the heart by a claw. Facing Jia, who was rushing over with all her might, Obsidian's face showed a cold, murderous intention. At this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger in his heart. Not only Obsidian, but Jia and Isabella also felt it. The source was the black dragon girl who was scared silly. In Olivia's hollow eyes, big tears suddenly fell, and her trembling lips murmured one word. Mom! The voice suddenly became louder, and a terrifying sound wave spread around with Olivia's as the center. Jia, who was rushing toward Obsidian, was blown away by the airflow. The wyverns in the nearby air fell to the ground in shock, and the soldiers covered their ears in pain regardless of the enemy or allies. In the scream, Olivia's pupils gradually turned white, and a mark gradually appeared on her forehead. It was 3 small diamonds. The middle one was slightly larger, and the sides were slightly smaller. At the same time, her bloody black hair began to flutter, and her nails quickly extended to a height of half a foot. Obsidian felt the drastic change in Olivia's breath. This change was not an advancement, but it seemed to have stimulated some kind of bloodline power. Not only that, it also carried a breath similar to Jia's, Heart of Light and Dark, previously. Obsidian had a hunch that the level of this breath seemed to be even better than the one suspected to be by Kuya. Swoosh! Olivia's figure appeared in front of Obsidian in a flash. Her claws made a terrifying sound of tearing silk in the air. The obsidian purple sword was held horizontally. When the claws grabbed the sword, sparks actually splashed. Obsidian's body trembled slightly as if he was surprised by Olivia's explosive power at this time. There were constant tremors and cracks on the ground. Isabella, who had fallen to the ground, could no longer see Olivia's lightning-fast figure. Even Jia, who had just advanced to the demon overlord, felt extremely strenuous with her eyes. A few thin bloodstains had appeared on Obsidian's face, but he was not angry or impatient. Instead, he calmly dealt with Olivia's crazy attack. With his experience, he could see that although this black dragon girl had undergone a powerful mutation, it was not her own power, but she was venting some kind of energy that could not be suppressed. As long as this energy disappeared, her body and spirit would definitely lose her combat power due to overdraft, so he only needed to stabilize for a period of time. Olivia's figure was punched away by Obsidian, and she fell into the crowd. She jumped up. Wherever she passed, whether it was the Capital Army or the Dark Moon Army, they were torn apart under that terrifying power. Olivia's! Isabella, who was tied to the ground in front, tried her best to call out. She had noticed that something was wrong with Olivia's. She seemed to have lost her mind. Olivia's was shocked. This voice seems to be the previous one. Olivia's figure flashed in front of Isabella in an instant, and the sharp claws in her hands flashed with cold light. Isabella was closing her eyes and waiting for death. She only felt that her body was light, and the rope had been separated by Olivia's. Olivia's untied Isabella's restraints, raised her hands, pointed her right index finger at Obsidian, and held her right wrist with her left hand. Her long nails looked particularly hideous. It was the Black Dragon Cannon posture. Before the Black Dragon Cannon was released, countless spreading cracks had appeared on the ground around Olivia's. Isabella, who was behind her, was oppressed by the released momentum and could not move. Shush! A faintly white-black ball whizzed toward Obsidian. This Black Dragon Cannon was much smaller than the beginning, but Obsidian's face showed a solemn expression. The power contained in this blow is far more than before. It should be the release of the uncontrollable superpower in her body. Obsidian did not take it head-on. He flapped his holy light wings and appeared in the sky. However, this black ball seemed to have spirituality as it chased after him at a very fast speed. Obsidian could not dodge it. The black and white colors in his eyes shone brightly, and his hands that were emitting Black Dragon Cannon welcomed this Black Dragon Cannon. The sky of the battlefield seemed to darken at this moment. The Black Dragon Cannon wrapped in obsidian constantly twisted and deformed during the flight. The white electric current intertwined and danced. After maintaining for about a few minutes, the speed finally slowed down, and it disappeared with a bang. Obsidian's figure appeared in the sky. The cloak behind him had completely disappeared, and a lot of cracks appeared on the black armor. Especially the left hand without a glove, it was covered with cyan. "Mom!" Oliphius's pupils returned to black, and tears overflowed from her eyes. Her powerless body staggered and fell backward. She was caught by Isabella behind her. The sharp nails had been retracted, but the diamond-shaped mark on her forehead still did not fade away. Obsidian was furious in his heart. The power of this black dragon cannon is not only terrifying, but it also has the strange attribute of destroying equipment. The most troublesome thing is that the poison in my left hand seems to be activated. My entire arm has lost feeling, and it is even spreading to the whole body. I must suppress this poison first, then kill the enemies below. Everyone had to die. At this moment, the sound of a horse neighing rang out. Horses neighing was extremely common on the battlefield, but this neighing drowned out almost all other sounds. In an instant, the seriously injured Isabella and Jia seemed to have been injected with a cardiac stimulant. Their eyes lit up at the same time. Even Oliphius, whose mind had begun to blur, seemed to have recovered a trace of sobriety. They saw a fiery red figure breaking in from the rear of the capital army's right wing. Chapter 547. The fiery red figure was a horse, with a black body and a single horn on its head. The horse's mane and tail were like flames, and its 4 hooves were burning with real flames. The soldiers along the way seemed to be stimulated by something fearful, and they escaped one after another. "Incubus beast!" many people exclaimed. Obsidian, who was detoxifying, couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. His gaze fell on the knight in a cloak on the back of the incubus beast. The incubus beast was a horse-type demonic beast unique to the demon realm. Its speed and strength were comparable to the unicorn in the human world. It was immune to all mind control. Individuals with mutated bloodlines could also manipulate lightning that could only be performed by unicorns. Its most powerful talent was the art of fear, which could weaken the opponent's combat power and fighting spirit. It was known as the most powerful ground mount in the demon realm. Incubus beasts were extremely rare, and they were arrogant by nature. Under normal circumstances, they would rather die than surrender. I didn't expect this person to have such a mount. Judging from the situation of the nearby soldiers being electrocuted, it is even an incubus beast with mutated bloodline. The knight's cloak flashed with a strange bright light. As he waved his hands, a large number of capital soldiers within a range of tens of meters began to fall into a state of weakness and chaos. Some even killed each other. At the same time, countless huge vines appeared in the capital army, madly attacking the nearby soldiers. The entire capital's right flank fell into chaos. When the night passed by the Dark Moon Army, the strange power became another feeling. The Dark Moon Army within the range felt that their injuries were recovering rapidly, and their energy became vigorous again as if they had been reborn. Agwile! The soldiers recognized the knight riding the incubus beast, and their morale was greatly boosted. The capital army's combat power was initially reduced sharply for some special reason, but now it was completely suppressed by the Dark Moon. The incubus beast was already flying in the air. The cloaked knight seemed to be looking for something, and he soon discovered the situation in the middle army. When he saw Jia, who fell to the ground, Isabella, whose veil was stained with blood, and the nearly unconscious Oliphius, his eyes behind the visor suddenly burned. He urged the incubus beast to quickly fly toward the middle army. Qinrui didn't know what had happened before, but judging from the current scene, Jia and the others must have experienced unimaginable danger. These days, he rode the little black horse day and night to rush here, but unfortunately, he didn't make it in time for the war. Fortunately, Jia and the others were still alive, so he finally made it in time. Obsidian thought of Jia's resolute attitude of, "I only belong to one man in this life," and a cruel smile appeared on his face. Agwile? The fiancé of Jia? The guy who defeated the Red Spirit Estate and Blue Lava Estate in the War of Lords? It should be at most Demon Emperor level strength. It's just nice to get rid of these threatening guys in one fell swoop. At this time, the poison in Obsidian's body was finally suppressed, and the green color on his left hand had become a lot lighter. With a wave of his hand, the purple sword on the ground had returned to his hand. The black flames on the sword were flourishing, turning into dozens of giant beasts that was toward Jia. If this attack hit, even if Jia was now at the demon overlord level, she would be annihilated. The sound of sonic booms sounded in the distance at the same time. In the blink of an eye, there was already a figure in front of Jia. His hand was glowing with a soft water-like power, and he faced the giant beast. The giant beast frantically attacked the figure in front of it, but under some mysterious power, it actually turned around incredibly and rushed toward Obsidian, who was in the air. Obsidian was taken aback. He held the purple sword horizontally, and the black flames flew. After a violent shock, all the giant beasts disappeared. The taste of being counterattacked by his own ultimate move was obviously not good. Obsidian's helmet and 2 shoulder armors had been completely shattered, and his eyes were full of fierceness. At this time, the little black horse, Incubus Beast, who rushed over, had already carried Isabella and Oliphius behind it. It ran to a distance under Chenrei's command. Obsidian did not stop it because his eyes were fixed on Jia. Jia rose into the air under the protection of Chenrei. She was holding a long sword in her hand. The tail of this sword was a purple gem, and the edge of the sword was 2 back-to-back angels. The body of the sword was snow white, engraved with 2 strange marks. It was simple and full of mysterious breath. Even if Obsidian closed his eyes, he could tell the name and characteristics of this sword. This sword had been with him for 300 years, but it never recognized his legal identity as the owner. However, in the hands of Jia, this artifact that had always rejected everyone and could not be approached actually emitted a strong light that had never appeared in his hands. In an instant, the entire battlefield felt an unstoppable, piercingly cold aura. Jia's clear voice resounded throughout the battlefield. "Rebellious Obsidian, the Sword of Fallen Angel is here!" For a time, almost everyone's movements stopped. Countless eyes focused on the sword exuding a powerful breath in the hands of Jia in the air. The highest artifact of the Empire. The Sword of Fallen Angel. Impossible! Obsidian yelled hysterically. Why? Why? Even if Obsidian was usually gloomy, he finally couldn't help but lose his composure at this time. For 300 years he had used all the methods, but he was rejected by the Sword of Fallen Angel every time. Why can this 20-year-old woman, who is just the granddaughter of Midnight Sun, get the approval of the artifact? Whether it was the lords, generals, or soldiers, they were all shocked at this moment. The artifact representing an empire has been inherited for hundreds of thousands of years. Its appearance and characteristics are well known. Judging from Obsidian's attitude, this sword is real. Only the real king of the empire can get the approval of the supreme artifact. Then, this is the choice of the artifact. Jia held the Sword of Fallen Angel high. Our sword should not be aimed at our own hands and feet. Our blood should not flow under the sword of our own people. As soon as this sentence came out, most of the soldiers, including the capital army, lost their fighting spirit. Obsidian felt the psychological changes of people, and he couldn't help but have a huge fear in his heart, as if what he had been worried about had become a reality. He roared wildly. Damn artifact! Damn woman! All of you go to hell! A flame suddenly burned in the air, and a sea of fire swallowed Jia and Chenrui. Obsidian, who had almost fallen into madness, had desperately activated his territory. This was a world of flames. The land was burning, the sky was burning, everything was burning, and the only liquid was the black lava that could be seen everywhere. The world was full of destructive suffocation and high temperature. Jia and Chenrui felt at the same time that the power in their bodies was constantly decomposing and disappearing under the burning as if their whole bodies were the fuel of the flames. Obsidian stood in the distance. The holy light wings on his back had turned into black flame wings, There were a total of 6 pairs like the legendary wings of the real fallen angel. His purple eyes were full of terrifying bloodshot. I am the real owner of the sword of fallen angel. All of you traitors must die. I want to suck all your blood and use your flesh and blood as a sacrifice. After something that had been suppressed in his heart for 300 years completely collapsed, Obsidian showed his crazy side. The flames between heaven and earth began to fluctuate rapidly with the emotions of the controller. A huge body arched out of the lava. It was 5 meters high, and its body was emitting a terrifying high temperature. It surrounded the two of them. As Chenrui's mind moved, the flame world in his eyes began to change rapidly. After he re-understood the supersystem, many functions had been strengthened that he had not before. In other words, Chenrui had truly mastered these functions. For example, the analysis ability of the analytical eyes. The original analysis ability of the analytical eyes was just a simple attribute. There might be a dangerous hint behind it. Now, the analytical eyes truly had the function of analysis. The power fluctuations in the territory, the attributes of the structure, and even the analysis of strength and weakness could be seen at a glance. Jia, protect yourself. Don't use the sword of fallen angel. Jia nodded. She didn't ask why she couldn't use the sword of fallen angel. She took out a long sword from the storage ring in her hand. In fact, she had previously felt that the light and cold aura of this sword before were not so simple. It seemed that it was not under her control. All she could do was to trust him unreservedly. This was a tacit understanding and trust. 10 Demon King level gold men suddenly appeared around Jia, forming a circle. At the same time, Chenrui's figure left Jia's side and appeared not far from Obsidian. Those huge bodies had already pounced on Jia. The gold men on the periphery went up and were knocked down almost in the blink of an eye, but they stood up tenaciously and continued to fight. The high temperature of those huge bodies was very terrifying, and the bodies of the gold men had begun to melt. Jia's eyes lit up in black and white. She raised the long sword in her hand, and a halo appeared around her, blocking the giants from advancing. Chenrui didn't look back at Jia. The light on his body lit up continuously. He activated the hot blood halo of Mystic Jade Armor and Battle Enhancement in Link Enhancement. There were 2 kinds of Link Enhancement, Permanent, Star Enhancement, and Temporary, Battle Enhancement. Star Enhancement was very expensive. It required 100,000 faith crystals. Due to the frequent use of Royal Star Transformation, a lot of faith crystals were consumed. Since Shura swallowed the Wheel of Hera, the growth of faith crystals had become slower and slower for some reason, so this number had not been reached yet. Chenrui had an extra mask in his visor. In the next second, the flame power between heaven and earth rolled back uncontrollably with him as the center. The terrifying temperature suddenly dropped a lot, and the strength of the giants was also declining. Devour talent? Beelzebub? Obsidian felt the rapid loss of spirit power in the territory, and he suddenly thought of a rumor about it while he snorted coldly. This devour almost emptied the spirit power of this territory, but the territory power of the Demon Overlord level was not comparable to the Demon Emperor level. It was as if the real world was infinite and inexhaustible. It gradually began to replenish and recover. When he was in the Crystal Valley, Chenrui used this trick to empty Manu's territory, but Manu's territory was basically structured with magic power and spirit power, which was greatly restrained by the God-eating mask. The most important thing was that Catherine seized this opportunity to cast her own territory and severely injured Manu. Without Catherine, then Manu's territory would automatically recover after a period of time. When Obsidian's territory power weakened, many spheres suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. They rotated in a strange rhythm. From a distance, they were actually stars which seemed to be 2 intertwined worlds with the flame world. Between the stars, there was scorching heat and burning power with different attributes from the flame world, making the flame seem to be constantly assimilated and absorbed by the stars. Obsidian felt that his power had been weakened a lot, and he was secretly shocked. He had a new estimation of Chenrui's strength. How can a demon emperor rebound my fire beast? How can he cast his territory freely in my fallen flame world? Judging from the momentum, he is almost about to enter the peak stage of the demon overlord. In fact, it is the result of royal star transformation, plus galaxy territory, plus mystic jade armor, plus battle enhancement. The sword of fallen angel must have been given to Jia by Aguile, then Aguile should be one of the culprits of the capital chaos. Thinking of this, Obsidian's hatred skyrocketed again. His figure appeared in front of Chenrui, and he slashed down with his sword. The 12 wings behind him were not decorations, but a transformation that combined the territory with physical strength, energy, and mind power. It was already a bit close to the territory kingdom's armor of faith. He increased his own ability to the limit. Even if the woman with terrifying magic power was in front of him, he had the confidence to fight. However, Obsidian didn't know that the enemy in front of him, who was close to the peak stage of the demon overlord, was wearing the real armor of faith. The North Sea in Chenrui's hand rippled with water-like light patterns, and it greeted Obsidian's fire sword. Under the strange effect of the light patterns, the flames on the obsidian purple sword were constantly being pulled and dissolved. What was even more strange was that the swords of the two sides did not collide even once. They used all their strength to fight with blunt force, which made Obsidian have a strong feeling of powerlessness. This was obviously the result of Chenrui's control. This kind of swordsmanship was realized from star diversion, and combined with some principles of Tai Chi from another world. However, Chenrui was just an otaku before the crossover, so he knew nothing about martial arts. Perhaps it was precisely because of this, so he could only rely on a little intention to comprehend his own water swordsmanship. Although his strength was inferior to Obsidian, Chenrui relied on the spirit power feeling that was not inferior to Obsidian. Coupled with the characteristics of the North Sea attack acceleration and the doubling of swordsmanship proficiency, he was in a stalemate with Obsidian for a while. His water swordsmanship was also becoming more and more proficient in this kind of actual combat. The more Obsidian fought, the more aggrieved he became. The strength level of this enemy is clearly similar to that of the Black Dragon Girl. It is far inferior to me, but it is experienced and has strange means. It is dozens of times more difficult to deal with than the Black Dragon. I will definitely not be able to gain an advantage in close combat. Thinking of this, Obsidian spread his 6 pairs of fire wings and pulled away. His black and white eyes flashed. He pointed the purple sword in his hand, and the flames between heaven and earth turned into countless streams of light. They flew toward Chenrui one after another like meteors in the sky. This kind of pure energy attack could no longer be resolved by the water swordsmanship. Chenrui attached Strider to his feet. He relied on the trajectory analysis of the analytical eyes to dodge the flame meteors flexibly. Obsidian glimpsed Jia, who was surrounded by the flame giants, and his murderous intention was triggered. The meteors in the sky immediately turned to Jia's direction.